end of time.
O'clock.
Hey everybody, what's going on? It's Wednesday. Time for the regular show. And this
show.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a good show. Like this dude, I didn't know a lot about this dude. I think maybe a lot of people don't. Although I kind of feel like he's kind of been seeping into the public consciousness a lot more like in the last few years, like, you know, thankfully. But this dude is like one of the coolest fucking dudes like to ever exist.
We're talking about Bass motherfucking Reeves.
Yeah, I'm sure that was probably his middle name.
Yeah, but
if not, it should have been.
Everything I've been able to find out about this guy, and there's a lot of legend, but the shit that can be verified, he was a bad ass. 6'2", hands the size of dinner plates, super honest guy, really professional, and brought in at least 3,000 men and suspects, captured them. He was a sheriff's deputy, lawman.
Yeah, like a U.S. Marshal.
U.S. Marshal, right.
Yeah,
And
so federal.
Yeah, he was federal level. They'd give him warrants, and he'd go down there and collect them. And he was usually in a posse. He had a posse backup. A lot of times it was a Indian scout. And the Lone Ranger was not based on this dude, but it should have been.
Probably not.
Yeah.
I know that goes around a lot, that maybe he would. There are some similarities, but I kind of feel like probably.
Well, there were white dudes that could also fit the Lone Ranger.
Sure, that's
thing
what I
too.
mean.
He wasn't the only black guy doing this, but he was
one of the first.
One of the first, and some of the few, and he was highly respected in law enforcement.
He was a legend in his own lifetime.
In his own lifetime, right?
Like there were legends when he was still working, because he worked as a marshal for like 30-something years.
Yeah.
And that some criminals, when they found out that he had the warrant for their arrest, they were so afraid to have him bring them in that they just turned themselves in.
Yeah.
Because they were like, I'm not getting involved with that.
Pretty much always got you. And he was about grabbing a motherfucker by the neck and shooting another motherfucker too, with it. Okay, he was real hands-on. He used disguises, which is kind of like how Lone Ranger wore a mask, but he would pretend to be a bum,
a farmer, a preacher,
preachers,
an outlaw.
Pretend to be an outlaw, and he'd infiltrate a group of criminals and then make an arrest. And he couldn't read and write.
Nope.
He'd have them read if they could read it, he'd have them read the arrest warrant so he'd make sure you gave him the right one. He had other ways of fucking figuring out who wrote, but it was kind of common for guys not know how to read and write, but it was uncommon for, at the federal level, a guy who was a federal marshal, they wanted guys that were literate. But he was talented, you know. They liked him and they let him do it. And he exceeded all expectations. He had a super good arrest record. And he was real honest.
Yeah, they said he was incorruptible.
Yeah, he stood trial for murder.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
And he could have run, but he stood trial for it. We're going to get into that. He collected a warrant, or processed the warrant, and collected his own son who was wanted for murder.
Yep.
So just because you were related to him, well, you weren't going to get away.
He was going to do the right thing.
Yep, brought him in.
No matter what.
Yeah, his son killed his own wife.
Yeah.
In a spat over another man.
Yeah.
He walked in on her. He let it go, let it slide. But then she kept seeing him. So he killed her.
Yeah.
And Bass went out to go get him. A bunch of shit happened with this dude.
I mean,
yeah.
Yeah. So like because I've watched like a fuck ton of documentaries about this. There's a great, if you guys like Time Suck with Dan Cummins, he did a fucking hilarious like 2.5 hour podcast about Bass Reeves, and for half of it he was tripping balls, and it was like pretty hilarious. Like all of the shit, like Dan Cummins is fucking hilarious anyway. Like that shit is, Time Suck is so fucking funny.
He was 6'2", good looking guy, fantastic fucking mustache.
That's what Zach said. Also, I love this guy's mustache. It's like a smile you can pet.
Yeah. was married to a Native American woman. Had 10,
I think she was.
wasn't
Like,
she,
well,
she Choctaw?
she was maybe Choctaw or Chickasaw. She might have been mixed. She
Right,
might have
okay.
been mixed black and native.
Right.
And then I think, like, because she died, like, later on, and then he married again. And I think his second wife was maybe Choctaw or Creek. I can't remember.
Yeah. And then he had 10 kids.
10 or 11.
10 or
Although
11,
I've
at
seen
least.
some that said 12, too.
Well, some of them might have been out of wedlock. or
Yeah, I
something,
think
right?
I heard that he had at least one out of wedlock. Well, see, that's the thing. It's just...
He was gone all the time.
Yeah, because he was out on the range. Like, that was his whole job. And he had a massive jurisdiction. Like, it was Indian territory. Which we'll get into, like, which
Right,
was
what
like
that was.
which was like the worst. It was like the most lawless area of the Wild West. And it was 75,000 square miles. Like,
Yeah.
he wasn't the only dude doing it. I think there was like 200 marshals.
Yeah, he grew up in Indian territory because he ran from slavery. Ran to Indian territory, grew up in there. So he was kind of part of a tribe. But then he left there once slavery had ended because they had the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yeah.
He came out and worked as a lawman.
Yeah.
Actually, I think there was a couple years he was worked as a lawman before when slavery was still on, wasn't it?
Yes.
Or I don't remember.
They're not, well, like I said, they're not, because this is Wild West and there's, it was a long time ago. He was black, so they don't keep a lot of records about that, sadly. There are a lot of records of him, but because he was so well known and so legendary even in his lifetime, some of the even like newspaper reports, like when he was still alive, were a little bit exaggerated maybe. But the thing about it is that there seems like so much cool shit, even if some of the stuff about him was exaggerated, which I'm sure some of it was, but even all the stuff that is not really in dispute makes him like cool as shit. Like he didn't even have to do all of that.
Yeah.
And it's crazy that, maybe other Wild West figures were more revered and he was like kind of forgotten about, it seems like, until fairly recently.
Well, okay. My theory on the reason why he was kind of forgotten, and he was not forgotten by Old West fanboys. They knew all about him.
Oh, yeah. I'm just talking
know,
about kind of mainstream
But the
culture.
mainstream didn't know about him because a lot of the mainstream understanding of the Old West is based on Hollywood movies.
Yeah.
Especially around the 40s and the 50s and those movies were bullshit. Just bullshit.
Yeah.
Everybody was all clean. Everybody was white in them.
Which is not.
That's not the way it was.
Well, I've seen a lot of estimates that Wild West, 20 to 25% black.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, all the Native
Yeah.
Americans and all the mixed race. And
Yeah.
it
America
was not
was-
white.
America from day one was mixed. Always. Salem Township, where they had the Salem witch trials, what they're not telling you is a lot of those people were Native American and black. The only people that were really white, is like the white like me, were the guys running the town because they were just fresh from England.
Right.
Everybody else had married Indians.
Yeah. I mean,
and Indians
as you would.
converted into
Sure.
Christianity and stuff. Well, it was mixed back then, but they kind of whitewashed it in the 50s through television
Yeah.
because they're just trying to sell a product.
Yeah.
And the people who owned televisions that bought products in the 1950s, mostly white people.
We're white, yeah.
And they were most of the ones that were going to theaters. So they were catering to white people.
Yeah.
So they made sure everybody was white. When they showed Indians were basically portrayed as savages, basically.
Yeah. And
they
they
were
were
so-
usually portrayed by white actors.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah, and they're portrayed as like Stone Age.
Right.
Indians were modern in this area. They were, using guns when guns were good. They
Yes.
had money. They wore clothes. They went into town. Some of them accepted American citizenship. Other ones didn't. And they got cast out basically to Indian territory because Jackson wasn't going to have independent countries inside the borders of the United States. He said that was redundant governance. There's only one government, not two. We were already having problems with state governments too, because the federal government was real weak. I read Jackson's address and why he was going to do the Indian Removal Act. It made sense for the time. He said, if you're going to stay inside the United States, you must be a United States citizen. If you don't want to accept citizenship, you have to leave. Most of them accepted citizenship. The people who didn't got moved. A lot of the trouble is the fact that they didn't, like the Seminole and and the Crow just couldn't be next to each other. They hated one another. Because the Indians were like the Europeans. They had been at war with each other for fucking thousands of years.
Well, like I said, there was like a lot
Yeah.
of them here way before the Europeans got here,
Right.
and it's like they had their own fucking shit,
Yeah.
man. Hundreds and thousands of tribes.
The Apache and the Comanche were at war with each other for 500 years.
Mm-hmm.
One of the longest running wars of anybody.
That might be
And
a
they
good
just
show, too.
hated each other. You could not put Apache and Comanche next to each other.
CB said, I believe this guy's story was found when Rochester did Red Dead Redemption 2 and the fans made him famous again. Could have been. It does seem like, there's been a bunch of movies that have him as a character, like Corsicana. I'm trying to think, what's that one called? I think I have it written down here. It's called Hell on the Border. That's kind of about him. And he's been in a bunch of video games and stuff like that. And I kind of feel like they've been trying to, like, Morgan Freeman has been trying to do, like, a movie about him in a long time.
Yeah.
There was a movie called The Harder They Fall that had him in it as, like, a character. So it's just kind of like, I feel like historians and stuff knew about him, but I kind of feel like mainstream didn't really know about him. But then, like, recently, Paramount Plus had that series, Lawmen,
Yeah.
that is about him, and that was actually the guy that did that is Taylor Sheridan, who's the same guy who wrote the screenplays for Sicario, Hell or High Water, Wind River,
So he's the one doing the series,
Sicario, Day of the Soledad, Soldado, I mean. Yeah. So we wanted to watch that, but I was like, I don't have Paramount Plus. But there's a really good, like I said, there's a really good time suck episode about this, and we watched, there's a channel called Wild West Extravaganza.
Yeah, excellent channel. Funny.
And
Real
it's
funny.
and he's funny. Like the guy is like really funny. Like I like his voice.
If you like
and,
this show, you'd like that show.
and he did a 2-part series about Bass Reeves, and it's about an hour and a half long. I think each one was like 45 minutes.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was really good, and he took like a way deep dive. Like,
yeah, he was trying to
into
divide between what was legend and what was true.
which I'm kind of gonna do too.
Yeah.
But mine's a little bit more loose. But
This dude was wild, man, and he lived in a hard time, in a hard place, and it was even harder if you were black. And then later on, it got even worse when segregation came down after the Civil War.
yeah,
And then that fucked him up too. He lost everything he worked for, but he stayed in law enforcement. Times changed. The Wild West days faded away, and in the early 1900s, he was still out there working.
yeah.
He worked until he died. It was about
I think
70. 2 years before he died.
2 years before
But
he
that's-
died.
When you're that old,
Yeah.
you worked until you died.
Yeah,
You had 24 months of rest, and then you died.
yeah.
2-year vacation. But no, they kept him on. And there's news clippings and everything talking about what a legend he was, and he's got somebody with him. He's carrying a cane, but don't think that you could take him. He's real fast. He said
Yeah,
he's real good with guns.
Yeah, they said that he could basically, that he was like one of the best shots like ever. Like he was super, super fast.
Yeah, he had a bunch of cool quotes. He's like, there's a lot of guys that can shoot fast, but they can't aim straight.
Yeah.
So they were spraying and praying. Some dudes with those old revolvers just capped them off in your general direction, but they couldn't hit.
Yeah.
Thinking Bass Reeves aimed. He shot true,
Yeah.
fast and true. Single, well-aimed shots, single action. Just cock the hammer, bow, send the round to the target, and then cock it and do it again. He wasn't sitting there going that pow 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 pow. Just bam, bam, bam. Where you're supposed to.
I mean, the thing about this dude, I kind of feel like being a black man in this time period of American history, the fact that 95 or more % of the press about him was positive about how fucking awesome he was, like, at everything. Like, not only was he, like, an amazing shot, he was an amazing tracker, he could, like, speak all these Indian languages.
Yeah.
And if they issued a warrant for you, like, and he got it, you were in big fucking trouble because 99% of the time he was gonna get you. And, don't ever get in a gunfight with him because you're in big fucking trouble again. But another thing about it, too, was that everybody seemed to have, like, a lot of respect for him because he seemed like a good dude. Yeah. Like I said, he could not be corrupted. He couldn't be bribed.
You couldn't make him mad either.
They said he was real chill.
Yeah,
and funny.
Yeah, he'd try to arrest guys and they'd throw a bunch of racial slurs at him and he'd just start praying to them.
Yeah.
And quoting Bible verses and arrest them anyway. There was this one guy who was a wanted murderer that killed a bunch of dudes. He shot at least 11 people. Bass ended up putting him down in a gunfight, and as the guy was dying, that racist dude fucking told Bass, he says, "You are a brave man, Bass Reeves." And he says, "I want you to have my gun." It's killed 11 people. And he died.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
That was one of his most famous.
Right. So he winning
Jim
over
Webb,
racists.
that guy.
He was winning over racists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, so for that
winning
to
over
happen.
the racist dude that he killed.
Yeah.
Yeah, the guy's dying. He says, "You are a brave man."
Yeah,
I want you to have my gun.
Like I said, you know, in some of these
stories, he kept that gun the rest of his life.
He did, yeah.
Yeah.
And he would show it to his kids and stuff because
Yeah.
he had a bunch of kids. But it's like, yeah, so I kind of feel like, yeah, some of the stories might be exaggerated, but the fact that nobody really has much bad to say about him, even not only just being a badass, but also just being like, he seemed like a good person.
Incorruptible. He wouldn't take bribes.
Yeah.
You see, the deal was that he knew that all eyes were on him too.
Yeah,
He
that's
had to be-
I was kind
He
of
had to be perfect.
Yeah.
You know.
He had to be better.
He had to be better than
He
everybody
wouldn't
else.
be able to get away with anything.
Right. A white guy could fuck up and then get away with it.
Right.
He wouldn't be able to get away with it.
No, and
They'd
I think
never
he
let
was-
him. They were looking for any excuse, some of these guys, to say, "See, I told you."
Yeah. And I
told
think
you.
he was very aware of
Yeah,
that.
he knew it was up.
I think he was very aware
So
of
he
it.
was like the ultimate Boy Scout. He was like fucking
Yeah.
the Lone Ranger,
Yeah, which I think is why a lot of people like associate him with
Indian
that.
Scout, and everything.
Yeah. But, you know, like I said, we'll kind of talk a little bit about that, but I don't know. Nobody knows for sure if it was based on him. Yeah, there's some similarities, but I think the similarities are, you know, there's similarities with a lot of other figures from that time period.
One
too.
source said that some stuff survives between the guys making the movie up,
Yeah.
and they were basing it on a movies or a television series. I think it was movies.
Well,
And they named the movies that they were based.
They
on.
were basing it on Tom Mix,
Tom Mix,
who was a big cowboy actor at the time, and also kind of a combo of like Robin Hood and Zorro.
Yeah,
That's kind of
what-
who they
yeah.
were. That's who they said that they were basing it
Right.
on. So not necessarily.
They weren't historians. They probably wouldn't have known who Bass Reeves was.
Maybe not, especially back when, because the Lone Ranger, started out as a radio serial, did it not? Like, and that was what, in the 30s?
Yeah,
So I kind of feel like, although Bass Reeves had only been dead, but he died in 1910,
yeah.
so he hadn't
He
been
did
dead
about
that
20
long.
years.
But
But the world had changed.
yeah, so it's like that's plenty
Yeah,
of time for
the-
him to be forgotten. Sadly.
Yeah, the world had changed, and the era of the Wild West was gone. Had been long gone by the time Bass died,
Yeah,
and he wasn't doing exactly the same job.
yeah.
He was just being a regular town cop.
He was like a beat cop
Yeah, he
at the
wasn't.
end of his career.
He wasn't a Lone Ranger at that point.
Because circumstances had changed.
Circumstances changed.
You know what I mean? He wasn't like out there on the plane in the lawless.
Yeah, and they really weren't selling those little pamphlets anymore. Those little most criminals are actually famous lawmen or famous gunfighters, and criminals had these little novelettes written about them. It sold a lot of them.
Yeah.
And they were just mostly it was total bullshit made up.
Yeah, of course.
But everybody was out back east was interested in that kind of shit.
Yeah.
What was happening in the West. I don't know if they made any about Bass Reeves. They should have.
It would surprise me if they didn't.
Yeah.
Although, yeah, I wonder if anything like that survives. I've never heard anybody like mention it.
Because even the bad guys they wrote about, they would make up shit.
Yeah.
And make up adventures of, like, what's his name? Fucking Billy the Kid.
Yeah.
And almost everything in those little novels.
That's
is
just
made
made. Most
up.
of it's made up.
Yeah.
But like I said, most of the shit about Bass Reeves seems like it's not made up. Some of it might be a little bit exaggerated for sure, but
Some of the range is given. Shooting a man at 500 yards with a 44-40 lever action carbine. No,
yeah,
not
I
possible.
doubt it.
Be lucky to be 100 yards.
Yeah.
Probably more like 75, 50, 75. That's where most things happen,
Yeah.
within 50 yards.
But you know how it gets like
Yeah.
exaggerated. Well, they know that gunfight happened. Like
Yeah.
there were a lot of witnesses. But yeah, they probably like over the years it probably became like he was just getting farther and farther away
Yeah.
from the dude like when he shot him.
Yeah, they just exaggerated. That was a long shot. They're probably talking about 75 yards.
Yeah.
But then next thing you know, it's 500.
Yeah.
You know.
I've even heard 600.
Yeah.
Which no way.
No, that rifle can't.
No
that
way.
rifle is a carbine. All right, it can't do it.
Yeah.
Not enough energy. You'd have to have real long tangent sights. You'd have to arc it, and flight time would be forever. It'd be pow. Duh.
Meanwhile, the guy
That's
would have
how
run
long
to the
he'd have
next
been gone.
county.
Yeah, that's how long it'd take to fucking hit that. Yeah.
Right. That's what I was at. Yeah. And we were like listening to a podcast about last night
Yeah,
too,
no.
where the guy was saying it's like, yeah, it's like I
know.
don't think it's impossible, but it's like really,
No, it's impossible.
really unlikely. Really unlikely.
It was black powder. They were
Yeah.
choosing-
I mean, he
which
did
is-
shoot the dude, like I
Yeah.
said, but I don't think he was as far away.
It was
as
black
they said.
powder, pistols, and carbines. Probably rimfire, too. Which that comes into play later when we talk about why he got tried for murder,
Yeah.
which was kind of a setup, if you ask me. But
It was, but yeah. Well, there was a reason why he was brought in, like after, but yeah. But
wasn't it like 2 years after the thing
it was
actually
2 years
happened?
later. Yeah.
It's because the boss switched out. And I
Was
think
was a former Confederate.
yeah,
That's why.
yeah. The Confederates that were taking over in certain areas, they were still fighting their war.
Yeah. So there was that.
And
whole thing.
anything to fuck up the feds, and by that time they'd gone on. Whites in the South did not like black people at all.
No.
By the time that shit went down.
Yeah, and
a
like I
race
said,
war immediately broke out in
it
the South.
seemed like, I mean, he got shit on a lot, like during his life. You know, when he was in, you know, Indian territory and stuff like that. But it seemed like it got worse after segregation.
Yeah,
After
it made
like,
everything worse.
like Plessy versus Ferguson and all that. Well, after Oklahoma became a state too, but he only lived a few years after that because
So
that was
like, what
1907.
do you mean it got worse? During slave times, when slavery was legal, there were lots and lots of free blacks. They weren't segregated. They could do whatever they wanted. If you were either free or you weren't free. If you were free, you had all your rights. You could live where you wanted to live. You could marry who you wanted to marry. You could go into establishments. It wasn't until after slavery down, basically a fucking race war broke out in the South, and they started arguing on a legal basis to say that segregation was legal.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court said, yeah, I guess it is.
Yeah.
I guess it is legal. Well, then all of a sudden, everybody got separated. And then they started passing laws about who you could marry.
Mm-hmm.
And that was after slavery.
Yeah.
So for a free black person, it got worse after slavery.
Yeah.
Because now they're being told what it is they have to do.
Well, for sure, it got worse for Bass Reeves, and like
Yeah.
he even, according to his biographers and stuff like that, said that he felt betrayed after that happened because
Yeah.
he had worked for the feds, for the federal government, bringing in, you know, criminals for justice and stuff like that for like 30 years,
Yeah,
and now suddenly
All of a
he's
sudden, he can't go to a restaurant.
like he can't
Yeah.
go to the same restaurant as like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
white criminals that he's arresting.
Yeah.
Like, and that seemed really unfair. Well, it is obviously.
Yeah, and these white criminals could get all uppity.
Right.
You know, oh no, we're separate and equal. We're separate but equal.
Yeah.
Black guy's not going to arrest me. Bring a white cop.
Yeah. And like I said, I'm not saying there wasn't that shit before, because he did get a lot of shit about, because there were a lot of white people at the time, even before segregation, where they were like, we're not gonna be told to do what to do by a black man.
But that wasn't in the law.
But there wasn't.
Yeah.
You know, he was the law, so
Right,
he
yeah.
could arrest whoever he wanted to.
Right.
But then after that, he couldn't even like I said, ride in the same train car as like
Yeah.
a white person. Or
He said
like that.
he could arrest white people,
Yeah.
but he said it wasn't worth it. Since
Yeah.
they caused too much trouble.
Yeah, he arrested
So-
a lot fewer white people
Yeah.
after that happened. He
Yeah.
still did, but he was just like, it was just too much hassle.
Too much hassle because other white people would get into the mix and try to stop the arrest.
Right.
Shit like that. So he wanted to work in places that were mixed or black. That's
Yeah.
where he was working
Can't blame him.
at the end. Yeah.
You know,
That way he could just do his job.
Yeah,
Without this fucking
without all
racial
this bullshit.
in the way, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. And it's just kind of like I said, he had problems before that, but not to that extent. And, you know, he was older then, too, so I guess he was probably glad that he was getting the fuck out of it after all that time. But, just the fact that he operated for so many years in easily the most dangerous jurisdiction in the United States at that time. I mean, it was, like I said, it was completely lawless, and we're going to get into why that is.
Now they're in there asking about Red Dead
Redemption.
Yeah, I've heard it's a great video game. I haven't played it.
I haven't played it either.
They say it's really good. That it's actually pretty accurate of the Old West. You see, the guns are accurate.
Yeah,
And
you
what they can
you'd
do,
probably
too.
love it.
Yeah.
I wonder how much it is these days.
Probably not as expensive as it used to be.
Yeah, you can just start out with the older ones. It's
Yeah.
probably like cheaper.
Yeah.
John Robertson said, "Hey guys, I made another live stream. Love the topic. I'm a native from Arkansas,
Okay. Yeah.
and we don't talk enough about bass. I live in Grant County, which is about 2 hours away from Crawford County. That's where he was born. at.
Okay. Yeah.
That's like pretty awesome. Yeah,
I think there's statues of him over there, isn't there?
there are. I don't remember where they are, but like I said, I do kind of feel like the statue was put there. I think in the 90s or maybe in the mid 2000s. I can't remember now. Phantom said the video game's cheap on eBay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, I'd get mine through Steam, or not through Steam, through Xbox 360.
Xbox 3. Yeah, he just downloads it through
Yeah,
there.
I just download it. I'm doing Fallout 3 again.
Yeah, he's
Because I
going-
didn't do the expansions, so I'm going to do the whole thing again and do the expansions because I haven't played that one in years. It's good.
It is fun.
It's just as good as 4. You know,
Although,
not
I
as
mean,
complicated,
the
but-
difference between Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, like the look of it, is like I had forgotten how big of a difference it was.
It's not that big of a difference.
I thought it was.
No.
Because I forgot how old Fallout 3 was.
It's old, yeah. Xbox 360.
What is it, 2008 or some
Yeah.
shit like that? That was
It's close.
that was a long time
It's
ago.
close.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, we've kind of been getting into it, but
Yeah.
before we get like really into it, I wanted to give a shout out to Dermot, who is one of our patrons, who sent me a very nice PayPal donation the other day. So thank you very much, Dermot. You know, we always appreciate any kind of support for the show.
Somebody
So-
said that in Bass Reeves' times, it was illegal for a black man to ride a horse in the South. I don't believe so.
I'd have to look at
I'd
the
have to look that
laws.
up,
I mean,
yeah.
it might have been different from state to state or even from county,
County
to
to
county,
county,
for
yeah.
Christ's sake, because
Right.
it's still kind of like that nowadays.
Okay, people have a lot of misunderstandings about the way things used to be. My family's from Mississippi. I grew up a lot of times in Heidelberg or Laurel, Mississippi. Mississippi is the blackest state in the Union. I think it's about 35% black. And it was back in the times of slavery, it was about 10% black. They also had a lot of free black people when slavery ended. But basically, the way the situation was is that slavery was illegal in Mississippi in half the counties. So it was a contentious subject even back then, even in the state that had the most slaves, which was Mississippi.
Yeah.
And it was still banned in half the counties. All that slave catching and stuff, that was because slaves were running from one county to go to another county. And they could hide there legally for a while.
Well, wasn't the
Then
federal?
they started changing laws.
Yeah, I was gonna say the federal law at the time was like even if you went somewhere where slavery was technically not legal,
They could repatriate
they
you.
could still
Yeah.
take you back to your
Yeah, but it
quote
took-
unquote owner.
But it took years and years for them to come up with that law.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it wasn't
So-
like that at first. It was
No.
only after everybody started escaping,
Yeah.
understandably.
There was enough time had lapsed where some people would run from slavery and just run one county over and live a whole life
Yeah.
and get away with it. Because in that county, the laws weren't made for they could go get you.
Right. Yeah,
So-
that might have been like a slightly later,
Right.
and that might have been a federal law. I'm not
Yeah.
entirely. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that was a federal law.
And in this time, states, not all the states that you know were states inside the Union. Most of them were, especially in the West, were territories, they were just places. They didn't have a state government, not at first. And then sometimes they would kind of declare a state government, but it wasn't a reality yet. It took years for them to like pacify that place as a state. It was a lot more chaotic.
Yeah, I mean, this is
It
a
was fucking
massive country
chaos. Yeah.
with just like loads and loads of prairie and loads of desert and loads. You know what I mean? It's just like hundreds and thousands of square miles with like nobody.
Yeah.
But you know,
And the state was not the basic government unit in the United States. The basic government unit was the town. The town. Mostly the government was the town. That was the government. And then towns would gang up and create a county. And a county was kind of like your country or your state. All right. And then the state itself was more like your country. A Mississippian and an Alabaman, or a Mississippian and a New Yorker, they were living in different countries. They still are kind of
essentially, yeah.
It's essentially that today.
I mean,
kinda.
but I mean less so.
Less so, but In those days, even more so. It was
Yeah.
like another country.
And I've heard that brought up like by several historians that it's like it was kind of like you were more
about your state.
about your state than like being an American or
Yeah.
whatever. Like you're just like I'm a Pennsylvanian or I'm a, like that was like
Yeah.
a way bigger deal.
In Mississippi, and I was from a place called in Laurel and Heidelberg. It was Jones County, and we called it the Free State of Jones because we had an insurrection where we seceded from the Confederacy. And so we fought against
There's a
the
movie about
Union
it.
and the Confederacy.
Yeah. They didn't like nobody.
No.
They just didn't want nobody telling them what to do.
Yeah. So
I get it.
sometimes you could be in one state and your county go to war with other counties surrounding it.
Yeah.
And a lot of it had to do with, well, the situation and also the racial stock. Let's be honest. The South is like Scots, Irish, and German. Mixes. And it was like medieval Scotland in the thinking. You know, clan warfare, literally.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
Clan warfare, yeah. Your family and the friends of all your families taking over an area and getting pissed and waging war on the other group, on another county, over, say, whiskey
Yeah, fuck those dudes.
or horses.
Yeah.
They're making more whiskey than we're making, more bootleg whiskey. They're making more bootleg whiskey than we're making. We got to kill them. You see what they did? They stole a horse. Yeah, just shit like that.
I mean, yeah, stealing horses was a big fucking deal back then. And honestly, like a lot of the dudes that Bass Reeves was going after, like a lot of them were like fucking rapists and murderers and stuff like that too.
Yeah.
But like a lot of them were horse thieves and whiskey smugglers.
Yeah.
Like that seemed like a lot of the fucking criminals that he was going after. Because like I said, it was kind of a big deal. Because you actually weren't allowed to sell or even like take alcohol into Indian territory, were you?
I don't know. Basically, anything could be legal or illegal depending on what county or city you
That's
were
what
in.
I mean. And I kind of feel like...
Some cities, everyone could have a gun. Pretty much everybody. That was your constitutional right. But locals could regulate it. Some towns allowed you to bring a gun into town. That same town may not let you take it into a saloon, though.
Probably a wise decision.
You're right. Although some towns didn't care. You could take it into a saloon,
Yeah.
too. And there'd be shootouts in
And
the
there'd be
saloon, but they
shootouts
didn't
in
care.
the saloon.
They
Yeah.
didn't care.
They're just like, whatever.
Yeah, the towns that were like that didn't
We'll just
care.
buy new glasses.
The towns that were like
Clean
that
the
were
blood off the
tended
floor.
to be temporary towns built around a sawmill or a gold mine.
A gold mine, I was going to say.
And they're in there gambling. And it's all young men, very few women. If there are women in there, they're hookers in a brothel.
Yeah, because why would a normal woman
Right.
want to go there?
And they're there, and they're indentured servants, so they're slaves too.
Right.
And a lot of that shit isn't brought up. Most white girls in the South working in those brothels were slaves, basically.
I mean, essentially,
Yeah.
it wasn't that different.
You get signed in on a contract, you become an indentured servant. You couldn't leave until your debt was paid off.
Yeah, and they shipped a lot of girls from Europe and stuff like
Yeah.
that with under false pretenses.
Yeah.
And then they ended up in
They had
brothels
black
when they
girls
got
in there
here.
too. Same thing.
Yep.
Because the black guys were looking for women also.
Yeah.
So most places would just, they wouldn't let you have a white hooker. They let you have a black hooker though.
Yeah.
So, they had that too.
Had to have one for everybody.
Yeah. So,
Keep the customer happy.
well, I imagine some girls didn't matter and some towns probably didn't matter.
Yeah.
But more deluxe towns, they had racially segregated prostitution. So everybody could get some without pissing anybody else off. Because some dudes are like, I'm not sleeping with her, not she has to be with black guys.
Yeah, there's going
That
to be
was
like a whole thing about it.
There was that going on, right.
And like I said, everybody just wants to like, look, can we just conduct business without
Right.
all of this other
Right.
like extraneous bullshit, please? It's like, so I can see how they were wanting to take the
Right.
path of least resistance.
But in the towns that you see on television or in the movies where the guys are in the bar and they're shooting each other up and guys getting killed and shit, that could happen in a town like a mining town. And a lot of times there wouldn't be any trial. And there's no complaints either. It's kind of like those dudes were there under the understanding that you could get killed.
Yeah, they're
This
like,
is-
that shit happens.
Yeah, you're in, this is where you come, this is where it is. Now, just because there wasn't a trial doesn't mean that you didn't pay for your crime. That guy's friends would come running after you, they'd kill you.
Sure.
So you didn't necessarily get away with it. It's just that you weren't tried.
Yeah.
You were usually run down in a posse and hanged on the spot,
Then they'd leave you hanging
whether
in
you
the
were
tree.
guilty or not.
Yeah, they
You
weren't
might
real.
you might have killed the dude in self-defense. He might have pulled the gun on you first. You
His
just
friends
happened to
didn't give a
win the
shit,
shootout.
yeah.
And if that dude was more popular than you, you might be swinging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like maybe one of the reasons that Bass Reeves survived as long as he did in a profession in which many U.S. Marshals were killed, especially in this territory, was I think because he was so respected and because he was a good dude. Like, he understood the importance of networking
Yeah.
and like making friends with people, being cool to people, shit like that. So it's like when he needed information, he had a whole network of like friends that he could talk to, being like, "Hey, I'm looking for this motherfucker."
Spies
Have
and
you seen him?"
scouts.
Right? And it's just
Yeah.
what. And I think the reason that he was so good at that was because he was such a good dude.
He was honest, yeah.
And he was very honest, and people knew that
Yeah.
they could trust him, even if they were on the other side of the law, because he actually was friends with some outlaws like Belle Starr.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? So he just seemed like I said, just a good dude that commanded respect, like, wherever he
Yeah.
went, and that really did serve him very well, like, over the course of his
Casey wants
career.
to know if Kane was made up. Kane from Kung Fu.
From Kung Fu.
Totally made up. Totally made
As
up.
far as I'd
That's
have
not
to-
even a Chinese dude.
Welcome now.
What's
I
that
would
guy's
have
name
to.
again?
Yeah. Oh shit. Why did I just forgot? Why do you always like ask these questions?
Because
when
you
I'm not,
remember
like-
everybody's name.
I know, but like I don't right now because I'm concentrating on
Yeah.
this. But it's like I'll remember it in a second. But
Yeah.
but yeah, it's just he might very well be loosely based on a real person. Like a lot of things are, but I don't know. I never heard that it was based on a real
In
person.
general, the Chinese really weren't known for getting into any kind of trouble or any action in the Old West period. They'd fight each other though.
Yeah, they
But they
seem
were
like
most-
there because there were a lot of Chinese
Yeah.
immigrants here
San
in the
Francisco
Old
mostly.
West. Yeah, in California,
Yeah.
but they kind of kept to their own.
There was a time in San Francisco in Chinatown. It was in the 1800s sometime. I don't remember
David
the exact date.
Carradine.
David Carradine. He had errato asphyxia. Isn't that how he died? think
Yeah,
so.
I think so. Yeah.
Hung himself from the back of a bathroom door or some shit like that. The where the Chinese had declared war declared war on each other in two different factions. I guess they were Tongs, and fought each other out in public with sticks and butcher knives, and a bunch of them were killed. And when they announced it and even gave a date on when they were going to go to war, and a whole bunch of white people showed up to watch it, and evidently they watched these two huge gangs of dudes chop each other up for a few hours, and then they settled it somehow. But like dozens of people killed,
Yeah.
and no questions asked. Because in the Old West, the Chinese were like from another planet. They didn't, as long as they weren't hurting any what they considered to be American people, they didn't care what they did.
Yeah, and they just mostly brought him here to work on the railroads.
Yeah,
honestly.
work on a, and then later on they were doing the laundry.
Yeah. CB said until the law was changed, if you were American and went to an Indian reservation and do sex crimes and you could do sex crimes and get away with it because it was like a country with no duration or I guess like jurisdiction in the U.S. Well, yeah,
That was with all crime.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it wasn't just sex crimes; it was
All
all
crimes.
crimes. And well, like I said, that's kind of why the whole Indian Territory thing. And we'll talk about like why this was kind of a dumb idea where they had this whole kind of thing happen. But yeah, so the reason why Indian Territory was so dangerous during this time period was because obviously all of the quote unquote civilized tribes, the 5 civilized tribes that were that had been displaced to the Indian Territory, which is now Oklahoma, Kansas area. They had their own courts, their own laws, their own police service, their own everything like that, but they were not allowed to arrest white men or black men. They could only arrest Native Americans who committed crimes, you know, against other Native Americans. So they kind of had to keep things to themselves. They weren't allowed. So all of the criminals took advantage of that. They're like, well, shit, we can go into like Indian territory and do whatever the fuck we want.
You're in another
They
country.
can't arrest us.
Yeah, you're in another country.
That's one of the reasons that they got all these U.S. Marshals to like go in there and like patrol the shit because it was just becoming like a fucking free for all.
Yeah. Same with Mexico. You
Yeah.
committed a crime here and you ran to Mexico, you were scot free.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
Mexico
why there's
couldn't
so
do it.
many movies about
Yeah, running off to Mexico.
like just run off to Mexico after you commit a crime because like there was nothing they could do about it.
Pancho
you know?
Villa do the same thing the other way around. He could raid inside Texas and inside the United States and then hop back across the border. I mean, it'd be scot free.
Yep.
They really couldn't do it. There wasn't any extradition agreements or anything.
Which, like I said, that seems like
That shit came later.
yeah. I mean, you can't
Yeah.
really do that to the same extent anymore. But I mean, I kind of feel like nowadays it probably catch you wherever you are. But I don't know. This kind of shit just seemed like I guess they weren't really thinking about it, but it just seemed like a horrible lack of foresight. This whole like Indian territory. Well, we'll let them have their own laws, but they can't arrest white men or black men. So meanwhile, like all of these criminals
laws were subordinate to our laws.
Yeah, it's like meanwhile these criminals like, woohoo, I'm just gonna go over there and do whatever the fuck I want. You can't do anything about it, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah,
Duh. I mean, that seemed like really easy to see.
Well, their
happening.
attitude was as well. The Indian territory was always kind of lawless. It's just tribal law.
Right.
So
Which like didn't count, I guess.
Yeah. Well, the tribal law would probably kill you. They could probably do shit to you for something ridiculous too. You know,
Yeah, but
breaking some kind of religious taboo.
Sure,
Yeah,
but they did that here. Like white people did that too.
Yeah,
so
but
it's
you're
not any
walking.
different.
You're walking. Yeah, but you're going through Indian territory and they see you leading with your left foot on the wrong day, and they go, "Oh no, you must have some kind of bird spirit. We got to punish you." You know, some weird shit like, you don't know. You just don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing.
Although the Indians tended to be pretty, what do you call it? Practical. They weren't really.
Yeah, they weren't.
They weren't really overly superstitious.
I mean,
they were
yeah.
religious. They weren't overly.
Yeah,
superstitious.
like they're all different, obviously,
Yeah.
but I never got the impression that a lot of them were like super superstitious like that. Some of them are, but not to the extent where they would just like fucking kill you. They would for sure kill you if you did some shit that fucked with them, but and in horrible ways. But
or if they thought you did.
or if they thought you did something, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess we'll kind of get maybe we should refill the drinks
I'll
before
get you.
we get too
Okay.
into it.
Okay.
But yeah, so I don't know, man. Like I said, I've been watching a lot of stuff about this guy. I read a book. There was I think it was just called Bass Reeves something, and it was on what do you call it? Kindle Unlimited. And it's just it's a novella, honestly. It was just like 60, 70 pages long. And that was a really good book too. Like if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free. Kind of the main book, I guess, that a lot of people talk about when they talk about Bass Reeves. So I guess this is kind of like quote unquote the definitive like biography of him, is called Black Gun Silver Star by Art T. Burton, who's a historian. And so that's kind of like the go-to. I haven't read that one, but like I read like a bunch of synopses of it, and a lot of the stuff that was in there was also in this other book that I read. And like I said, we watched a bunch of documentaries about him as well. I think the Wild West Extravaganza one was the best because that guy had read the book and he kind of talked a lot about what was in there. Because like I said, there's so many stories about him that are probably exaggerated, but maybe, I don't know, maybe not by much. Maybe not by much. But Art T. Burton, the guy that wrote that book, in his opinion, and this is a quote from his book, he says that Bass Reeves was, quote, the greatest frontier hero in American history.
Who said that?
The guy that his biographer.
Okay.
Which, like I said, that is a bold claim, but honestly,
It was backed up by documentation, though. About
yeah,
how many people
maybe
he brought in.
he's definitely in contention. Definitely in contention. Like I said, dude was not only a badass,
Workaholic too.
yeah, but he just also was like I said, just a genuinely good dude. He was like really honest. He was
Liked
really
his job.
yeah, and he just had this. Everybody said he had just like this sense of like duty, like we have to do it this way, and he was just like I said, he was like incorruptible, which probably very unusual.
He was doing the job in the first part because he saw how things were improving, especially for him. He escaped slavery, and slavery ended. Black people started to have more jobs and more things to do. So he thought it was going to increase at a linear level. Then segregation happened.
And then he's like, well, fuck
And that
me.
fucking changed the game. But he
Yeah.
stuck with it.
Yeah.
Stuck with
And
it.
like I said, he was older than
Yeah, by the time that happened.
by the time that happened, so it was just like he still kept working like after that, but it
He
wasn't.
trusted the law. Trusted American law. He thought it would all work out.
Yeah.
Which it did, but it just took a lot longer than he
It
thought
took a
would.
lot longer than he thought it would, which it always does. You know what I mean? So yeah. Famously brought in over the course of his career, he was a lawman for 32 years. Brought in at least 3,000 criminals, maybe as many as 4,000. And as far as anyone knows, only killed between 14 and 20 men in the line of duty, like while he was bringing them in. It wasn't really his thing, I guess it seemed, to just kill him and bring him in dead, because he was almost kind of like the marshals back then. It was almost kind of like a bounty hunter. Like, you got a daily stipend, like, for feeding the prisoners and for 10 cents per mile that you had to go to, like, find the motherfuckers and all that. But you basically didn't get paid until you brought them back and you got the bounty for them. And he made a lot of money because he almost always got the dudes. Like, I think very, very few men escaped.
I think they said there's an equivalent to by today's was about $100 something thousand a year, wasn't it?
Yeah, like a little bit more than that. Which, like I said, that's a decent living, and especially like for back then, like he made a lot of money. Like you know, he kind of got fucked over later on, which we'll talk about later. But he was really good at his job, and he was well paid for his job. You know, so there was that. And as I said, he seemed to want to bring the dudes in for justice. You know what I mean? He didn't just want to like go and just kill them, because you could bring them in dead or alive. They didn't care. Like, you'd still get the reward if they were dead.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Be less.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it was. Because some of the shit just said reward whatever amount, dead or alive. So it's like, I assume they would give you the same amount of money. So it'd be easier just to like fucking shoot and plug him in the back of the head or whatever and drag him in. But he didn't do that.
They're talking about a seriously badass dude, though.
Yeah, but he hardly ever did that. Like, the only times that he ever killed people were when they drew on him first. Yeah. It seems like. So
I guarantee you that you got more for them if they were alive.
They probably were.
If not, then you become an assassin. You're like, fuck all that extra work, man. I'm just going to go for the volume. I'll just shoot him fucking with a rifle at fucking 300 yards and go over there and collect him.
Because that's the thing. It was a pain in the ass. You have to think. He wasn't alone. He at least had, because it wasn't, when they sent the marshals out, you at least had to have one other dude who was called a posse man with you. But they usually had a couple of other dudes too. But you had to have at least one, like, by law. So they would go out, and this is a huge, huge territory. So you have to think they're going out with a stack of warrants. Like, go find all these dudes. Like, it could be 15 dudes. You know what I mean? And so you go out in the prairie or, you know, the desert or whatever the fuck, and you're out there for like a month. Like, going all around, like, trying to find these motherfuckers,
Living
right?
in the field.
Living out in the field. So they had to take, like, a big fucking wagon. They had to take a couple wagons with them, like, one that had all the food and supplies and shit like that, and then one that was kind of like that they could put the dudes in sometimes. Although a lot of times I think what they did was they chained them all together and made them walk behind the shit.
So they're doing a route.
Yeah.
And through the whole route, they got all the captured prisoners with them.
Yeah.
At the camp.
Yeah.
Walking behind that wagon.
Yeah.
Walking, chained.
Yeah, for like weeks. You have all of these criminals.
Those dudes in the
with
same
you.
clothes. Those dudes in the same clothes, not bathing. All that time.
So what I'm saying is that it would have been so much easier to just plug all of them, pile other bodies in the wagon, and be like, hey, they all fought back. Give me the money. But he didn't do that. He only, like I said, he only seemed to do that when they tried to draw on him first. Yeah. Because he would bring them all in. And like I said, I think there's records of him bringing in, and he would bring in a bunch.
15 of them at a time.
Like 15 of them at a time, 19 of them at a time. Yeah. Like, they have records of all of the, like, he would come in like every month or 2 months or something like that with like all these fucking criminals that he had all these warrants for. And he very, very rarely killed them because he wanted them to face justice. You know what I mean? Because he seemed like really into that. Like, he genuinely seemed like he believed in the law and he believed in justice and he was doing his job. And he was proud of doing his job. So, yeah. So, we mentioned this before, but he was a big dude. Now, 6'2" might not sound like a big dude nowadays. But back then, that was a big fucking dude. You know, because I think the average height back then was, what, 5'4"?
They showed him next to the guys he worked with.
Yeah, there's photos of him, like, with the other marshals.
They had a few guys, white guys, that were his size. But next to him, the older guys up front, they like came up to where the fucking bottom of his fucking pectoral muscles, the bottom of where his titty would be.
Yeah, they're like
That's how
they're
short
like
that
right
dude's like
there.
compared to him, right? And he's sitting there, smile on his face, that big old fucking mustache. His hat and shit, yeah, big old hat.
And they said he was like a real fucking snappy dresser too.
Yeah.
Like he always looked like immaculately like turned out, and he always had like that big ass mustache and a big old black hat. And he usually had like a big. Well, he had to get kind of a big horse. He couldn't ride a pony because he was big for the time. So, but he usually had like a white horse or a gray horse. That's how the legend goes. That's how the whole Lone Ranger thing came about, because he supposedly liked lighter colored horses. But like I said, probably a lot of dudes did back then. So, yeah. So, okay. So let's kind of get into his past a little bit, like where he came from and like how he came up and stuff. So they're not sure exactly what day or anything he was born. They think that it was somewhere around July of 1838. Now, he was born into slavery in Crawford County, Arkansas. Now, he was named Bass after his grandfather, whose name was Bass Washington. Now, him and his mom, whose name was Paralee Stewart, were owned by a guy in Arkansas who was a farmer, and he was also like in the state legislature, and his name was William Steele Reeves.
Yeah. Now, before we go on, you said that these people were owned by them. Slavery was going on. That's a modern terminology. That what they did back then is they renamed it. They called it holding. They weren't slave owners. They were slave holders. That's the way they fucking kind of
Rationalized it?
They tried to soften it.
Yeah.
We don't own these people. We're just holding them.
So deep down they knew it was bad. So they just wanted a word that didn't sound as bad.
Yeah. Well, they pointed to the Bible as justification. They're saying, see,
Of course they did.
The Bible tells you,
Don't they always?
how you can do this and how you're supposed to do this. So therefore, it's okay. You know, but we're not bad people. We're doing this for their own good. Because they can't live without us.
I kind of feel like that's always
we're
their
taking care of these
justification.
people. They see it as a work for welfare program. That's
Sure.
how they're fucking
Oh, I know.
rationalizing.
I know.
Yeah, we take
But
care
that's
of
what
them.
it
We give
is.
them food,
It's a
food.
rationalization.
Yeah.
And the fact, see, here's the thing. You can talk about like back then, oh, they didn't know any better and stuff like that.
No.
The fact that they had to rationalize
They
it
knew better.
tells me that they knew better.
Like I told you, in Mississippi, which had the most blacks and the most slaves, it was banned in half the counties.
Yeah.
Slave holders almost always owned plantations. Plantations were big business. That was like a corporation. That's the way it was compared to everybody else. And they made all the money. They sucked all the money out of Mississippi and Alabama. Those plantations did. And that slavery generates poverty. You can't compete against it.
Yeah.
As a subsistence, you just end up becoming a subsistence farmer. You're growing food only for yourself to eat, maybe trade with your neighbor. You try to take it to the market and sell it. You can't sell it for a price. You know what I mean?
You can't compete with somebody that doesn't pay for labor.
It doesn't pay for labor, right? And those plantations that had cornered the market, which that's why Newton Knight and the county I came from rebelled. That way, why are we fighting to protect plantations? Plantations have made us all poor.
Yep.
You know,
they knew what was up.
That's a rich people's game. You know what I mean? So it was an uprising between white, what are they called? Subsistence farmers.
Yeah.
And free blacks. All right. Because they were free blacks and whites lived right next to each other.
Yeah, they all got together.
It was a big mutiny.
Yep.
Again, and then they declared themselves the Free State of Jones. But then the war ended.
Yeah.
But they killed some Confederate colonels and officers and drove the Confederacy out. Our leader was a dude named Newton Knight, who had two wives, a white one and a black one.
Yeah.
Because the white one disappeared. She thought he was dead, so he married a black woman.
Yeah.
Had kids with her, but then the wife came back.
Yeah.
And she was like, "Oh yeah, I thought you were dead too," type of deal.
Whoops.
So
well, I mean, fair enough. You know what I mean.
It was just an accident. So, but he kept them both.
Yeah. I guess you would. I mean, it would be awkward for sure.
Well, why? You know,
but
he had kids with her too, so he was responsible for both of them.
Right.
He didn't want to divorce her.
Like I said, I think we reviewed the movie. There's a movie called Free State of Jones, which has Woody Harrelson in it.
It's a great movie.
Which is actually, it's fairly historically accurate.
Yep.
At least from what I could determine. And it's a good movie, too. I actually quite liked it.
Yeah.
So if you haven't seen it, because I don't hear a lot of people talking
My
about it.
ancestors were involved in it.
Yeah. But yeah, it was a good movie. And like I said, if you don't, and I kind of feel like that's a little known aspect of American history, maybe.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that someone made a movie about it, because I kind of feel like more people should know about that. Well, because like I said, everything in history is a lot more complicated.
Yeah. The South was not,
seems.
The Confederacy was, in general, not fighting to protect slavery. Each individual person, and in each county joined that war for different reasons. They seceded from the Union. The Union then invaded, and people will always choose to protect their families and their homes over anything. You had black people joining the Confederate Army, which they don't talk about that. And that's because when Sherman came through Atlanta, he burned the place down. He'd grab black people and say, "Where's the Confederate Army?" And if they didn't know, he'd hang them. He'd hang them as "Oh, so you're siding with the Confederates?" They didn't know. So he hung a bunch of them, and then he said that they were all going back into slavery when the war was over anyway, because they emancipated only the slaves in the South. They said if you get back into the Union, you can keep your slaves. Some of the states did that. So some of the Union states had slaves. So it's super
Like
fucking
I said,
complicated.
It's super
They were
complicated.
just trying to hold the Union together. They used a bunch of different issues as weapons. One of them was slavery.
Like I said, a lot of... Well, that's what makes history so fascinating to me, is that everything is way more complicated.
Yeah.
Like I said, I know they can't teach all of the nuances of everything in school because they don't have time, but it's just kind of
Yeah, and the last Confederate general to surrender, he fought 2 months after the war had already ended, was a Native American Indian general.
Yeah.
In the Confederacy.
Well, it depended on the tribe.
Yeah.
Some of the tribes fought with the Union, some fought with the Confederates.
Mm-hmm.
It was just kind of whatever area it was in, whatever... everyone was kind of fighting for their own self-interest, really, largely.
They were trying to get away from what they considered to be corruption and abuse from gangsters in the federal government. That they were taxing the South, but then not allowing the South to represent itself or speak in the federal way. And they were doing things like economic warfare. The South would start a big business. Businessmen in the North would try to choke them out by dropping prices. So there was an economic war and it went on for decades before the war ever started. It just built up to the war. It had been bad for 30 years, 40 years. Everything's slow boil.
Well, yeah, I mean, and especially back then. Nowadays, shit happens super fast, but back then, it's shit took fucking decades to play out. Lady X has arrived and said, "Hey everyone, this is my third great-grandfather."
Oh, it is?
That's pretty awesome.
So you're related. Okay.
I mean, I'm sure he probably has a lot of relatives nowadays.
Yeah. Well, he had 10, 11 kids.
Yeah, I've seen 11. I've seen 12 also. He had a bunch of kids. Now, some of them died when they were children.
Yeah.
But most of them lived into adulthood. And actually, there's a lot of interviews with his daughter, Alice, who told a lot of stories about him. I'm going to run to the bathroom.
Okay.
So, yeah, about something.
All right. Leave me hanging. I now got to talk about stuff. All right. Let me see
have a problem doing that.
Yeah. All right. Casey Lee was talking about he wished that there was a series from The Dark Tower. It's a Stephen King series of books. I think I read 4 of them. The Gunslinger, and then it went on. I don't remember all, but you know what? I read them when I was a kid. They were really good books. I know it kept on going. I didn't read the whole series, but it's ripe for a Dark Tower series. And I'd also like a series of The Talisman, which was Peter Straub and Stephen King working together. That was a good book, big thick book. We had a fan of the show send me the television, the old, I think it's 80s, late 80s, early 90s television series, The Stand. Had Molly Ringwald in it and a bunch of other stars. It was like an all-star cast. And they had it all remastered for HD TV, and man, it's a pretty good television series. But you could redo that, and that one would be even better too. Yeah.
What were you talking about? What do you mean nothing?
No, I was just talking about the Gunslinger or the Dark Tower series.
Oh, yeah.
Casey Lee was talking, saying we need a television series. We said that after we saw that movie in the theater, and it fucking sucked.
Well, they
And
tried
we
to
said-
cram too much into one movie.
Yeah, you're not gonna be able to tell that story in one movie.
No, absolutely. How many fucking books is it? A lot. All right, so okay, so where was I? So yeah, so him and his mom were owned by this farmer and a guy that was in the state legislature, William Still Reeves. Now, when Bass Reeves was about 8 years old, this was about in 1846. The plantation owner, or the guy that owned him, the farmer, moved from Arkansas to Grayson County, Texas. Now, at this point, it seems as though Bass might have been sent to the household of William Steele Reeves's son, whose name was Colonel George R. Reeves, and he was a sheriff, and he was also in the speaker of the House of the Texas House of Representatives at one time. So they think that when he was a kid, he was sent to be a servant in the son's household of his original owner. Now, what he first did was he was what they called a water boy. It doesn't have anything to do with the Adam Sandler movie. It's just basically what he would do was he would go to the well and he would fill buckets up and bring water to the other slaves that were working in the fields. That was like his job when he was younger. And then later on, he supposedly worked as he helped out the blacksmith, and eventually he was made William's personal valet, which was a little bit of a step up. I guess him and his mom were kind of more considered, like house slaves, I guess, which was like a little bit higher tier. So he would do stuff like act as like a bodyguard or a coachman or something like that, like to his master, if you want to call it that. Now, evidently, according to lore, Bass Reeves did actually ask his master if he could be taught to read and write. And obviously, they couldn't have that. Don't want these black people like reading and writing. So no, he was not allowed to. And he, in fact, was illiterate his whole entire life. But he was, because he was, with his master all the time, it was his valet, he was actually taught to handle guns and, taught to ride horses and stuff like that. Now, he ended up being so fucking awesome at shooting that William ended up entering him in like all these shooting competitions, and I'm sure he like took all the money, the prizes from it too. Like he's just like, hey, well, you're a slave, I'm taking that.
This is gonna go towards me feeding you.
Yeah, like pretty much. But
he
yeah,
probably broke him off some. Probably.
You never know. You never know.
Probably divided it up.
But yeah, so he used to enter him in shooting contests, and also, according to legend, once he was grown, like once Bass Reeves was grown, he was not actually allowed to be in these competitions anymore because they wanted to give other people a chance because he always won.
He was too good, yeah.
One of the things that they used to...
Well, he focused on it.
This is the thing that's fucked up. They used to have, and I think that like the Native American tribes had some of these too, like they had turkey shoots. And basically you would take a turkey and hang it from its feet, like upside down. And then like you had to shoot its head off, like from far away. Like that sounds kind of shitty.
Yeah.
But I guess that was kind of like a competition, and like
well,
I guess
eat the turkeys anyway.
I know that, but it's like it still seems kind of fucked up.
Well,
but yeah, they would
probably flapping, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't. Apparently, they wouldn't let Bass Reeves compete in any of those because he always won. Yeah. So they were like, "Well, give someone else a chance." Jesus Christ! So there was that whole thing. Now, when the Civil War broke out, William's other son, George, he like joined on with the Confederates as a colonel in the 11th Texas Cavalry. And evidently he took Bass Reeves with him like as his kind of personal valet or what did they call it? Like a body? They called it a body something. I don't remember what it was. But he was like the dude. He was like his right-hand man or whatever. So he took him with him to the front lines, evidently. Now, according to Bass Reeves' later accounts, he said that he had been at several kind of high-profile battles in the Civil War. Battle of Pea Ridge, Chickamauga, Missionary Ridge. No one's entirely sure if this is true or not. I mean, obviously it could be, but nobody's entirely sure. There are also uncorroborated stories going around saying that Bass Reeves actually served in the U.S. Army on the Union side as a sergeant. And they're like, well, this isn't impossible because it could have been. There were some kind of Union Indian bands like in the territory. And it's like there was one called like the Cherokee Pins. And it's like he could have very well joined up with one of those and even enlisted under an Indian name. So it's like, so his name isn't on the records. They're like, it's possible, but nobody really knows. If he did join under a pseudonym, then obviously no one's ever going to be able to find that.
I seem to remember hearing that guy checked the dates and said that that's impossible.
Like I said, I don't think it's impossible, but some of the battles that he said he was in, I don't think it was possible for him to be there.
Before we go down this road much further, you all have to understand Southern culture and the culture of the men of the Old West, especially if they got famous. They lied their fucking asses off. That's what they did. They would do some badass shit and then lie about that. Especially mountain men, like Jeremiah Johnson and shit. He would tell the truth to another mountain man. But if he were what he called a pilgrim, which, you know, a non-mountain man, a cherry, you know what I mean? A sucker.
A muggle.
They're going to make all kinds of shit up, you know what I mean, to entertain themselves about what a rube you are. And it's just, and all those, Wild Bill did that a lot. All of them did that.
Yeah, it was kind of like came with the territory.
It was part of their culture, was to bullshit you.
Yeah.
And then fucking they'd tell a pilgrim something, and some wild ass story, and then that guy would walk off, and he goes, and then he'd go to some, Wild Bill would lean over to some other gunfighter or gambler, and goes, "Look at that fucking bullshit I told that dude, and he believed it." You know.
Yeah. What a dumbass.
Because there was a lot of hero worship, even back when these dudes were alive.
Yeah.
A lot of simping.
Well, I mean, humans are not any different than they were back then.
Right.
So it's like, so people like come up with these inflated stories about all of these people, and people want to believe it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The newspapers were like that at this time. The media was like that. They're in bars bullshitting, and you have a bunch of fanboys simping, and a bunch of gunfighters and lawmen taking the piss out of them. Just
like I said, it's just people piss and moan about like the media nowadays, but it's like, holy crap! Like back then, they didn't even like attempt.
No, they even tried to tell the
They just
truth.
like made shit up.
Yep.
They didn't give one single fuck.
Nope. They
just cared about selling papers. That's it.
The whole purpose of a newspaper was to sell more newspapers than your competition.
Yeah.
They would just say anything.
So it's like, so what are these people? What are the competing newspapers saying? It's like, oh, well, we need to top that.
Yeah.
So they would just make shit up.
Yep. Called yellow journalism. It's still around. It's just a mercenary journalism now. If you got money, they'll print any story you want.
Yeah, which, like I said, is the same as back then. Like I said, it's no different. It's no different. Yep. And like I said, if anything, it's probably a little bit better.
Yep.
Because at least now we have the internet and you can like check. But like back then, you couldn't.
Yeah.
So it's like shit would come out in the paper and you just be like, oh, I suppose so. Even though they just totally pulled it out of their ass. So there's that. So we don't know exactly what he was doing during the Civil War. He could have very well been at some of those battles. He could have very well like fought in some of those battles, like I said, under a different name. Who knows?
Or knew people that was there.
Sure.
Or just made it up.
Yeah, like I said, it could be any of those things. Now, apparently,
hold on. What? Not saying he's bullshitting.
Yeah,
because a lot of the
I'm
shit
just saying
that this
nobody
dude
knows.
did.
Nobody knows.
A lot of the shit that this dude did is documented. So he was a badass.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But they
that's not in dispute.
Right, yeah.
But like I said, there are some things in there that no one's entirely sure about or that can't be corroborated. I'm not saying that it's not true. I'm just saying that there's
can't prove it.
Like that you can't prove it. That's all I'm saying. Now, at some point during or slightly after the Civil War, Bass Reeves escaped slavery. Now, there are a couple different stories about how this happened. The most popular one being that him and the colonel, his master, if you want to call it that, they got in an argument about a card game, and Bass Reeves punched the dude in the face and knocked him out cold, at which point he's like, fuck this shit, I'm out of here, and he took off. So, like I said, however it happened, that's the most popular story, so that's the one I'm going with. So after he escaped from slavery, obviously, escaping from slavery was enough to get your ass killed, but punching out your owner was also going to get you killed. So he was probably like, yeah, I better get the fuck out of here. So he went where a lot of runaway slaves went, to Indian Territory. Now, here's the thing. So, like I said, we talked about Indian Territory before. Mostly what we're talking about is the area that is now Oklahoma. Some of it was Kansas as well. Interestingly, the guy that he punched out, allegedly, that was his owner, that dude died later of rabies. Like, he got bitten by a rabid dog and like that. Like, only a few years before the rabies vaccine, was invented. And I was like, oh, that's gotta suck. But yeah, there's Reeves County in West Texas was named after that guy. So if you live in Texas and you ever heard of that county, that's who it's named after. This dude's owner, who got killed by a rabid dog, who maybe Bass Reeves punched out at some point. So Bass Reeves escapes to Indian Territory. Now, he found, actually, it was quite welcoming there. Like I said, a lot of runaway slaves went there. And he kind of got in with a lot of what they called the 5 civilized tribes, which were the Cherokee, the Creek, the Seminole, the Chickasaw, and the Choctaw. Now, these 5 tribes were not indigenous to this area. They had actually been from, more the northeastern kind of area, but they had been, kicked off of their native lands and kind of ended up here. This was actually the last stop on the Trail of Tears, if you know anything about that. So the 5 of them, the tribes, had their own law in this area. They were sovereign. So this kind of they had their own courts, they had their own police force, which was called the Light Horse Police, all of that stuff. So Bass Reeves apparently lived here for quite a long time. They don't know a lot about the time that he was there, but he did apparently learn all of their languages and all of their customs. And he got very good at tracking, and he was, became very familiar with the entire area. They do know that in 1864, he married a woman named Jenny, with an I-E. I've also seen her called Nellie Jenny. I believe she was mixed race, but I'm not entirely sure. I thought she was part black, part Native American, but I don't... Because I was watching a podcast about it, and they put up a picture of her, and I'm just like, I don't think that's her, though, because the picture looked familiar, and I was like, that picture almost looks like one of the victims of the, what do you call it? The Atlanta... What was the Axeman of New Orleans, or the Atlanta... Axe murder, the Atlanta Ripper. It looked like that picture, so I was like, I'm not really sure if that's who that picture is of, but I'm not entirely sure who the picture was of. But they said that it was her, but I'm not entirely sure. So he got married in 1864. Now, after the Civil War ended, 5 years later, they already had 4 kids. They would eventually have 11, like I said, some say 12, but they had a bunch. And they had bought a farm in Van Buren, not far from the Arkansas River. Now, around this time, it was kind of like the police, deputy marshals, were coming into this area, like I said, because this was a lawless area. All these criminals were running there. So at this point, they're trying to we can't just have all these criminals running around. So it's they needed some marshals to come in the area, but they weren't familiar with the terrain. They weren't familiar with the tribes. They were kind of at a loss. So when they got there, they realized that Bass Reeves knew his way around, knew how to speak all the Native American languages in the area. He was, and he could help them out. So he started out kind of as a scout or a guide for them, like coming into the area, because they didn't know fuck all about it, and he did, because he lived there for a very long time. So that's kind of how he got, you know, the kind of like seed of his reputation, I guess. Now, as I mentioned, the Indian Territory, there were obviously some tribes that were indigenous to this area, but the five, quote unquote, five civilized tribes had come from elsewhere. They were like forced into this area. And the thing about it is that because it was the kind of area that it was, a lot of slaves, when they escaped or when they were freed after emancipation, a lot of them came there and tried to start their own communities. And this worked out a little bit, at least up until, 1887, the Dawes Act, all that kind of stuff, which only gave a certain amount of land to tribal members and then opened the rest of the territory up to like white settlers and stuff like that, after which it was kind of like that was the end of it. Now, there were some and we might do a show about this too, because this is actually kind of interesting, because in this area, like, there were some freed blacks at the time that were thinking, well, this territory could be like a black state, because they were kind of accepted there. They had like a bunch of towns, like 50 towns. They had a Black Wall Street, which you were talking about before, which was in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
We're going to do a show on Black.
I kind of want to do a show about that, because they had their whole own thing there. But, until 1921, the Tulsa Race Massacre, which, that was, we'll talk about that on another show, but yeah.
All kinds of weird shit happened in this country that most people had no idea, don't know anything about it. There was a war against communists. There was a communist army at one time. I think it was up in Detroit, wasn't it? Around Detroit. The army had to come in and wipe them out. And that was the beginning of gun control. Myth is that gun control was to keep guns out of the hands of blacks. No. The first gun control laws to ever be passed was to keep guns out of the hands of communists. Yeah, true. I just don't know. I just forgot all the details. It's been a long time since I've read about it. That'd be a good show.
Yeah, I mean, that would be another. There's
they had a whole army,
we could do.
With uniforms and everything. The communists, and I think it was like 1906 or 1910, around that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so as I mentioned before, because why this area was so dangerous is because the five tribes had their own court systems, but they could only arrest and prosecute people like their own citizens for committing crimes. If anybody came in that was white or another color or whatever, another race, they were not allowed to arrest those people. They had to like keep on their own thing. So obviously criminals are going to take advantage because they're like, well, shit, man, there's nobody here that's going to arrest me, so I'm just going to run in here and hide. So obviously it was just kind of like became a thing where it was just fucking full of criminals. Like it was like 75% criminals at one point. There was even a thing, which is kind of interesting, called the deadline. Now, the deadline was like a railroad track, but it was like a boundary, like where the railroad was. And basically, once you were over that railroad track, you were in like the Indian Territory, right? So outlaws they had the balls to like write out little notes with like, different lawmen's names on them, and like would put them on the outside of the thing being like, hey, Bass Reeves, you step foot over this railroad track, you're a dead man walking. You know what I mean? And like it would happen, and like there was really not much anybody could do about it. So what they're saying is that when the marshals would come into this area, a lot of them got killed. By some estimates, 114, 120 federal marshals killed in this area, which was way higher than anywhere else. Way higher. Because like I said, there was no...
And that was a lot of people when you consider how sparsely populated
the
U.S. was back then.
Right, that's what I mean.
The racial makeup was actually similar. It's just that as it is today. It's just there were far less people.
Yeah.
Just like we're turned up at 10, it was like turned down to like 1. There were very few people. A lot of space.
Yeah.
You could get away with a lot of shit.
And they did. I mean, yeah, they talked about how high the fucking murder rate was in this area, like way higher than anywhere else, really, because like I said, there was really no law and order, because the Native American tribes, they didn't have any jurisdiction over white men or black men or anything like that. They only had jurisdiction over their own people, so you could come in there and do whatever the fuck you wanted, and they couldn't really do much about it. You know what I mean? There was a very popular saying at the time that said, "No Sunday west of St. Louis, no God west of Fort Smith," which is actually where Bass Reeves worked out of. So yeah, once you went past that boundary, all bets were off, and a lot of lawmen got killed because it was really, really dangerous. So obviously, because of this, the feds are being like, well, we have to do something about this. You know what I mean? So right around 1875, Bass Reeves and his family, like his ever-growing family, they were farming and they were doing pretty good. But Isaac Parker, a man named Isaac Parker, was appointed the federal judge for the Indian Territory by President Ulysses S. Grant. Now, Parker was actually known as the hanging judge because he had like a high number of convictions that resulted in the death penalty, obviously. Although, interestingly, despite this moniker, he did seem, at least later on, to be pretty fair. Him and Bass Reeves had an interesting friendship, like a very strong mutual respect for one another. And honestly, like Isaac Parker seemed like one of Bass Reeves's biggest advocates, like really over the course of his life. Well, until Isaac Parker died, because he died before Bass Reeves did. So what happened was that Judge Parker, he appoints a dude named James Fagan as a marshal. And he says, what we need to do is we need to hire 200 Deputy U.S. Marshals and send them out into the Indian Territory to, like, pick up all of these criminals that are, like, running around loose, right? Now, Bass Reeves, as I mentioned before, had a bit of a reputation because he'd been, like, a posseman and stuff like that prior to this, like, helping, like I said, like, as a scout or, like, a guide for other marshals coming into the area that didn't know the area or didn't know the people and didn't know the language and stuff like that. So he was already on everyone's radar. So Parker asked him specifically if he would be a marshal, and he accepted. So he was recruited as a deputy. Now, as I said, keep in mind this jurisdiction is about 75,000 square miles.
So he was a deputy marshal then?
Yes.
Not a deputy sheriff. Okay, deputy.
Yeah, deputy marshal. Yeah. So at this point, he's about 37 years old, I think, at the time that he was made
Pretty
a
old
marshal.
for those days,
yeah. I mean,
mature age.
Yeah. Well, like I said, he'd like lived in the Indian Territory for a long time. Now, interestingly, they call him the first commissioned black deputy U.S. Marshal west of the Mississippi River. This might not be entirely true. He was for sure one of the first, but there were a couple of scattered reports of ones earlier than that. Like there was a story in 1867 about a posse that was led by a dude named Negro Smith, which I'm assuming, you know what I mean. And then
Smith.
Right. Yeah. And so he actually went out and caught he was after like a bunch of outlaws that had robbed a stagecoach. Okay. And he ended up killing the driver in the Choctaw Nation, which was in this area. And then in 1871, there was a report that a Cherokee, whose name was Ross, actually.
Yeah.
Maybe a relative of yours.
I've actually heard the name Ross in Native Americans.
Yeah.
It's common in black people too.
Yeah.
So
it's a very common name.
It's a noted name. You remember it when you hear it. You actually look at the numbers. There's not very many Rosses in the U.S.
Now I'd be interested to know how many there are.
Yeah, there's not that many.
But yeah. But there was a story in a paper that this Cherokee named Ross had killed a black deputy not far from Fort Smith. So there were some black deputies before this, apparently, like according to these stories. So it might not be entirely true that Bass Reeves was the first one west of the Mississippi, but he was for sure like one of the first ones, and obviously the best known and like the most legendary. You know what I mean? So he gets his like area was the Western District of Arkansas. Now, like I said, he served for like 32 years in this capacity. And as I mentioned before, this is very, very dangerous. He's basically taking his life in his hands pretty much every day. At least 114, maybe more than that, were killed on duty in this area, like Indian Territory. before Oklahoma became a state. So he ended up bringing in some of the most dangerous fugitives of the era. Now, legend has it that he was never wounded. Despite having, he had like his buttons shot off, his hat shot off a couple times, shit like his saddle horn shot, stuff like that. But the most sources will say that he was never shot himself.
That's not true.
I don't know if that's true because according to the book that I mentioned earlier, he was actually shot later in his career.
Yeah, in the thigh.
In the thigh, like in a saloon shootout.
Yeah.
Now, he killed the other dude.
Yeah.
And apparently, so...
There's a good quote from this.
Yeah, well, apparently what happened, he was, because as I said, when he was like, his later career, like when he was basically just a beat cop, so he would be going to all these saloons and like arresting people for illegal whiskey and blah, blah, blah. But so he's in this thing, and apparently the doctor comes there to, because he's like, hey, his friend goes and gets the doctor, and the doctor comes back and he says, hey, Bass Reeves has just got shot and he needs you. And so apparently the doctor comes into the saloon. The other dude, who was like a younger dude, is like dead, like on in a pool of blood with his gun still in his hand. And apparently Bass Reeves is just kind of sitting there chilling, like leaning back against the stool with his leg kind of bleeding and stuff like that. Doc's like, what happened there, bud? And he's like, he said something like, well, like a lot of these kind of, this
youngster, fucking what?
He said
something young buck or something.
Yeah, something like that. Like a lot of these youngsters, he doesn't understand that you can either like shoot. He can shoot fast but not straight or something like that.
No, yeah,
it was something like that.
He said he questioned. He didn't believe in my abilities, and I proved him wrong.
That it was something like that.
He didn't believe in my abilities, and I proved him wrong. And then later he said. There's two different. He said he could shoot fast, but he couldn't shoot true. And that means he was fast, inaccurate though. But he also said that when he shot that other guy. So that quote might be. I think it's misapplied to this one.
Maybe, or he might have said it more than once.
Maybe he did
too. Like maybe that was something he said all the time. Like these young motherfuckers, these millennials.
Yeah.
they can't shoot like fast and straight.
He didn't believe in my abilities, but I proved him wrong. It's something along those lines.
Yeah. But like I said,
so a young buck fucking pulled a gun on him
in a saloon.
And
he was just like, which
in most places you couldn't, unless you were a cop, you couldn't have a gun in a saloon, even in the Old West. So if you got a gun in a saloon. Even here, Florida's got constitutional carry. You can have guns and carry them. You don't need a permit. You go into a club, you're going to get hit with the metal detector. I'm out there like that. Because guys might take them in there. But it's an offense. It's a state offense and a felony offense.
Yeah, you don't want drunk people and guns.
To take a firearm into a place that serves alcoholic beverages. Can't do it.
Which, like I said,
even if you got a permit,
wisely said.
Unless you're a state agent, different. A cop can go in there.
Well, yeah, obviously.
Yeah, a clerk of court can go in there. Private eyes could probably go in there. Private detectives probably could.
Yeah. But like I said, it just seems like a smart law.
Yeah,
you know how dumb people get.
I'm a small arms expert and a veteran. I'm fucking highly trained. I'm a fucking small arms expert. Belt-fed weapons, pistols, everything. Assault rifles. I'm very disciplined. I wouldn't trust myself with a gun inside a club.
I wouldn't trust you either.
No.
No offense.
Somebody does something to her, and I go off on them as it is. If I had something in my hands, I'd probably use it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Well, honestly, I wouldn't trust myself either.
Yeah. Right.
If I had a weapon on me, whatever it was,
alcohol and guns don't mix.
No, they absolutely do not. Well, actually, like alcohol and any weapons don't mix. Like I said, even if it was just like a knife or something like that, I wouldn't trust myself to like fucking not use that shit if I got mad enough.
Fists are bad enough.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't trust myself not to punch a motherfucker out either. So, So I really don't need to be shooting somebody. So I don't want to get a fucking prison over that crap. But you know what I mean. You know how it gets when you get drunk and you're just kind of like, I'm gonna mess this motherfucker up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, chances are, dude was calling him all kinds of Negro, this and that, and fucking trying to get underneath the skin. Says, you can shoot me, I'm faster. Talking all kinds of shit, fucking drunk, and pulled a gun. Fucking, Bass fucking laid him out.
And he's just like, oh, well, that was a mistake.
Rightly so. If a dude's got a gun in a fucking bar and pulls a gun on you, he's out of control. You got to put him down.
Yeah, I mean, well, and he did.
Yeah.
And from everything that I could determine, I haven't heard, and I've heard a lot of stories about Bass Reeves. I never heard of a story where he lost his cool. He always seemed like super chill. Like, even when people were like saying shit about him, even when people like
thick-skinned.
Yeah, he was just basically, he stayed very, very calm. He always stayed very calm. And I think that was probably one of the things that kept him alive.
Yeah. That
That whole entire time.
Everything...
Like, he would, like, one time he approached a whole bunch of dudes who were lynching a dude.
Yeah.
Like, because they said he'd stolen a horse or something. He said he didn't, but I don't know what the whole story was. But he, like, just rode right into the middle, just...
Yeah.
Cool as you please. And everybody that knew him said he was completely and utterly fearless.
Yeah.
Like, he just was not, and he was completely, like, unflappable. Like,
Yeah.
he didn't get emotional, he didn't get upset, he didn't get nothing. He was just, like, totally chill. Which is amazing. That's, like, fucking badass.
Everything that I've heard about him that can basically be verified, I would say, as being a professional myself, he had a very high situational awareness. Very good emotional intelligence.
Yeah, oh, big time.
And he could insinuate himself into a crowd of people and then become dominant. Even though he was a black man in a time when white dudes didn't listen to black dudes.
No.
All right. But he was big. Okay. And there was something about the way he carried himself that he was probably just real alpha. But he was also kind of gave these guys an honorable out to the challenge. So I think he disarmed a lot of them psychologically doing what he was doing.
He seemed to have, yeah.
So, like I said, one of the dudes who fucking tried to kill him was a confirmed racist. Said all kinds of bad shit about him. And as he was dying, he says, "You're a fucking brave man, Bass Reeves. I want you to have my gun. I killed 11 men with that gun," and he died.
Yeah.
So he even won out haters.
Yeah.
They liked him.
Like I said, I kind of feel like, and that is a testament
Yeah.
to at least what everybody said about him. I never heard anybody say that he ever lost his temper or anything like that. He just always seemed pretty chill.
Yeah.
But still in a way that, like, commanded authority.
Yeah.
Like, and like I said, he would come into a situation, he wasn't afraid of you. He knew he could kill you. He knew he could kick your ass. And so he wasn't, and I guess he wasn't really afraid of dying. He didn't seem like. So he just kind of came in and no one questioned him. Like, he just came in with authority, and, like, he didn't have to yell. He didn't have to, like, throw his weight around or anything like that. He just commanded
Yelling and throwing
respect.
your weight around would probably backfire.
Yeah, that's what I think.
He
Like,
probably
he
just
was
went in
very good at
went in
reading
there.
the room.
And he went in there and was just real professional and friendly. And he would just let insults bounce off of him. Like, well, they ain't going to stop me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he
And
didn't get upset
and
or nothing.
I think that kind of earned the respect from the criminals.
Yeah,
They're like, shit, I couldn't hurt this dude
yeah.
with my words. I could have hurt him with a bullet. So
It could have been that.
you're a better
like I
man
said.
than me, Bass. It was that kind of shit.
Like I said, it
He
did
had
seem
moral
like
authority.
yeah, it did kind of seem like
He would quote Bible verses,
yeah, he was pretty
That was
religious
part of it,
too.
too. and that would probably suck the wind out of a lot of them dudes.
Yeah. Yeah, because he seemed like I said, he seemed like, you know how, like, some, like, religious people, and they'll kind of go on and on about this, and it's like trying to take the moral high horse, but they're full of shit. He did that, but he was not full of shit. He actually went along with, like, all this, but he was a very principled person, and I think that a lot of people weren't at that time, and so I think that commanded a lot of respect also. Like, that was the impression that I got from everything that was said about him. So, Case and Lee said, quick question, Tom, do you think anyone could shoot JFK from that window in the book depository?
Yeah.
Did we do a show about JFK?
Yeah, they could. But the thing is that I saw the films. I don't think Lee Harvey Oswald could. Not with a 6.5 Carcano. That's a shitty weapon. Not very accurate. Not very powerful. I think there was a team of guys that did that. That's what it looked like. He would have had to have been perfect to work that bolt to action and to get that many shots. Maybe it's possible, but I think it's unlikely.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said,
I've never owned that rifle. I've seen them. I've never shot one. It's like a 6.5. It's worse than a Japanese fucking Arisaka rifle, which is pretty bad. I think it was in 6.5 Nambu or something. 6.5 Japanese, real kind of mild pop gun cartridge. Nah, I think Oswald probably was a patsy. More likely, knowing how they do things now, probably. But you're never gonna be able to prove it. Too much time's passed.
Phantom said, did this guy actually wear a face mask like the Lone Ranger did? No, he did not.
No.
Well, like I said, I'm not entirely sure that the Lone Ranger was based on him.
The Lone Ranger didn't wear a face mask. He wore an eye mask.
An eye mask, yeah.
Yeah, like a disguise.
Although, and I was just going to get into this, was that Bass Reeves, as badass as he was, and everybody said that he could, like, kick your ass with his bare hands, and he was, like, a really good shot, like, better than anybody, really. But a lot of times, to bring in his, the guys that he had warrants for, he would use deception. So he was, like, almost like... He's been compared to Sherlock Holmes as well, because they said he was, like, really good, like, he did, like, really good detective work. And I said a lot of that was because of the connections that he had, particularly in the Indian Territory, because he knew all the Native American languages, and he had a lot of friends in the area that could tell him, hey, have you seen this motherfucker, like, where did he go, and all this other kind of stuff.
Too.
Yeah, and that, too. Like I said, he kind of grew up around... a lot of them. He learned a lot of tracking and stuff like that. So he was like shit hot at that. He was really, really good at that. But like I said, it seemed like his main thing to bring people in was because it seemed like he didn't want to have to kill the person. Like he wanted to bring the person in alive, and so they could, be tried as, because that was fair. So that's what he wanted to do. So a lot of times he would use deception, as in one of the most famous stories that is told about him. So he's going after these... He had a warrant for these brothers. They were, like, all outlaws. And they were in Chickasaw territory, and they were... he found out that they were staying at their mom's house. So Reeves decides... He has, his guide with him and, like, another, like, few people as a posse. And he's like, well, we can't all just, fog up on the house. It's like, obviously they're going to know who that is, and they're going to start shooting and stuff like that. So how about this? He's like, you guys stay 28, 30 miles away. Like, y'all stay over there. And then he disguised himself as like a hobo, or like not so much a hobo, but like an outlaw that was like on the run and had been like running for a long time. So he walks 28 miles to this woman's house where these people are staying. He even took his gun and like shot holes in his hat so it looked like the cops were after him and shit like that. So, and he had a cane and all this other, made his clothes all, raggedy and dirty and stuff. So he walks 28 miles to this house, and then he shows up, and, it probably was good for the role because he walked 28 miles. I don't know if he didn't have any water or anything like that, but he walks all this way, and he shows up on the porch. And he's like, man, it's like, please help. It's like, I'm running from the cops. I'm an outlaw too, and blah, blah, blah. And I just, I need some food. I need some water. Can I stay here? And blah, blah, blah. Now, because this woman's sons were also outlaws, she felt bad for this dude. She's like, yeah, fuck the cops, man. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, of course I'll help you out. So she lets Reeves into the house, gives him some food. They're talking like old buddies, man, like after a while. And he's just playing the role like, yeah, man, it's like I got chased by the cops. And he came up with like all these stories because he, he had been bringing in outlaws for years and years. So he would just tell other people's stories like, yeah, man, I was doing this and that. And she's like, holy shit, that's fucked up. You know what I mean? So they're just like talking like they're old buddies, right? And they're hanging out in the house. And then, he got her so good that she's like, man, you should hook up with my sons. You guys should do some crimes together. Yeah. And he's like, yeah, totally. So it's like he was like really good at this. So eventually the dudes, the outlaws, come home, and their mom's like, "Look at this awesome dude! Like, you guys should do some shit, do some crimes together." And he's just like, "Yeah, we should all do some crimes." And they're like hanging out and talking and shit like that. And then the two brothers are like, they're kind of drinking and stuff. But obviously, Bass Reeves, he's smart, so he doesn't drink. You know what I mean? Yeah. He's just like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna refrain." And then like after a while, the two other brothers, they kind of get sort of drunk and they're like get super sleepy. So they go in the other room and go to sleep. They're all like put them all in the same room because they're putting Bass Reeves up for the night. They think he's an outlaw too. And he's still awake. He waits until the brothers are sleeping, and he goes and sneaks over there and puts fucking handcuffs on him.
While they're asleep.
And didn't even wake him up.
See, that's what I was saying, that situational awareness, emotional intelligence, okay, is a lot of his weapon. He also has what's called strategic empathy.
Yeah.
He can put himself into the shoes of his enemies or the people that he's arresting. So he can control them.
Yeah.
All right. And what you see right there is like, that's some James Bond shit.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to come in here, I'm going to infiltrate.
Yeah.
Gain their trust. We're going to party. And when they go to sleep, I'm going to lock them up.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to betray them.
Yeah.
All right.
That's
That's really how it's done.
It worked.
That's really how you want to do
it. Like I said, it's not always all about...
It's not
like,
this glam flash shit.
Well, yeah, a lot of it, some of it's strong arming. He could do that too.
Yeah.
But it's like,
mixture.
There was a reason that he lived, and died a natural death instead of getting his ass shot off. Yeah. But, there's a reason he brought in so many dudes. It's because most of the dudes he brought in, he did shit like this.
Yeah. Secret agent shit.
He did secret agent shit.
Yeah.
So the hilarious thing, so he puts the shit on him and didn't even wake him up. And then, he kicks him awake and is like, "Y'all under arrest, bitches," pretty much.
Undercover cop.
And then he made them walk the 28 miles to where his wagon and the rest of his posse was.
Yeah,
and the mom was, chasing after, "You motherfucker!"
Yeah, the mom chased him for the first couple miles, yelling at him, cursing him.
You motherfucker. I mean...
Yeah.
It's just great. I love that he just put the shit on him while he was still sleeping.
Now he also uses brawn too. We're gonna get to that eventually.
Oh yeah.
Not just brains, but brawn too.
Yeah.
He's a mixture.
Well, here's another thing too. Yeah, and so one of the other stories about him, this is a very famous story about him. Now, at one point, he's out on the range or whatever, and he wasn't even looking for these motherfuckers. He knew that these motherfuckers, they were called the Brunter brothers. There was 3 of them. And they were famous outlaws. And he was actually looking for somebody else. He had a warrant for some other dude that he was looking for. But he came across these 3 motherfuckers. They had done murders, horse theft, robbery, all kind of stuff. Now, the 3 of them actually got the drop on him, right? So they all pulled their guns out and were pointing. He was still on horseback. And they were like, "Okay, we'll get down from your horse, bloody." But he's like, "Okay." And then he says to them, while all 3 of them are pointing their guns in his face, he says, "What's the date today?" And they're like, "Why the fuck you want to know that?" And he's like, "Because I want to know what date to put down on the arrest record when I bring you guys in." And they thought that was the funniest fucking shit ever. And they all started cracking up laughing. Now, the second they all started cracking up laughing, that was all the distraction that Bass Reeves needed, evidently. Because what he did was they just started laughing and they just looked away for a second. He whipped out his revolver, shot 2 of the dudes dead. It was just bam, bam, and just shot 2 of them dead. And they're not sure what happened to the third one. The third one, he either shot him dead too, or he hit him with the gun butt and knocked him out and took him in. I believe that dude lived, but he knocked him out and brought him in. But yeah, so the fact that he knew, he used a lot of tricks like that. One thing that he really liked to do, that he apparently did more than once, was that he would have a letter or something like that in his pocket, and he would take it out and be like, "I can't read. Can you read this to me?" So if a criminal would take it, because usually if you hand somebody to somebody, they'll take it just, that's just what people do. And the second that they were distracted enough to take some out of his hand, he'd be he'd whip his gun out and shoot him, or get the drop on him. So he did that a lot too.
Well, he'd make them read it.
Yeah.
Sometimes they was arrested. He'd say, they wouldn't know what it was. And he'd tell them it was something else. "Could you read this for me?" And he'd read it. And he goes, "No, that's not what this is. This is arrest warrant."
And he's like,
For
yep,
me,
that's right.
Because you're under arrest.
You dumb fucker.
As soon as they take the paper, he'd pull a gun.
Yeah.
Right.
He did one time where he actually, like, the dude had the drop on him, and he was gonna shoot him.
Yeah.
And and Bass didn't have his gun out, and he pulled that trick on him too. And he's like, well, if you're gonna kill me, he's like, I have a letter in my pocket. It's from my wife.
Yeah.
And I can't read, so can you read it to me? Like, that would mean a lot to me, like, if you'd read it to me, like, before you kill me or whatever. Yeah. And, like, the second he handed the letter, it was like,
"Pachow!" Gotcha.
Yeah. Gotcha,
and it was
bitch.
his arrest warrant.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it was. So he did that a lot of times, like, according to his daughter and according to, like, some other historians, like, he did that kind of trick. So, like I said, he would do shit like that. But as I said, he seemed like he always stayed perfectly calm, which probably helped him survive all of that time. So in 1884, this is kind of what you were referencing earlier. This is kind of one of his most famous exploits, I guess.
Missions.
It's one of his most famous missions.
Yeah.
So he's about 46 years old at this point, and has been working in the Indian Territory for about 9 years. So what had happened before? They're looking for this dude named Jim Webb. Now, Jim Webb was a bad dude. He's the guy that Tom was talking about before, like this white supremacist kind of dude. Now, this is actually the second time that they're going after him, because they had caught him before, but I'll get into this. So him and his posseman, whose name was John Cantrell, they're kind of sneaking up on this place called Jim Bywater's store, like it was a general store. And they're hoping that Jim Webb is in there. They've got intel that that's where he is, and he was indeed in there. Now, what had ended up happening was that a year prior to this, Jim Webb had gone into, like a lot of criminals had, gone into the Chickasaw Nation. Now, he had found work as, like, on a ranch. Like, he was a foreman on a ranch. And he was a real dickhead. Apparently he was boss over like 45 people, but he was like a real jerk. He was just like real tyrannical and shit. Now, what ended up happening was that their neighbor of this ranch was a black man, and he was a reverend also. His name was William Stewart. And he was doing a controlled burn on his property, evidently. And the controlled burn, like, as you do, and it kind of got out of control a little bit, and the fire kind of came over onto the ranch where Jim Webb worked. Now, Jim Webb was a white supremacist, and he really did not like black people at all. So this little transgression, which, like I said, was just an accident, spurred him to go over there and shoot the Reverend dead. So there's that. Now, Bass Reeves actually brought Jim Webb in on this warrant the first time. Because what happened, and again, Bass Reeves used deception on this. Him and his possemen, they show up at the ranch, and they are disguised as cowboys. And like I said, people knew who Bass Reeves was, but it's not like nowadays where everybody knows what every fucker looks like because of photography. Then nobody knew what he looked like. You know what I mean?
Just knew the name.
Yeah, they knew the name. Like, they knew the reputation.
They probably knew he was black,
But yeah.
Probably all they knew.
That's what I mean. So it's like they didn't really know what he looked like. So he could still, like, kind of have disguises and stuff. So they kind of show up and, like they're cowboys. And I guess back in the day, like, you could kind of show up at a ranch and be like, hey, we're cowboys. Can we, like feed us? You know what I mean? It was that kind of shit. So they did that. Now, to his, I don't want to say to his credit, because Jim Webb was a terrible person, but he was kind of sus. I don't know if he was suspicious that was Bass Reeves, the famous Bass Reeves, or if he was just like, I think this is a marshal. But he was kind of suspicious of him, right? So him and his friend, his compatriot, whose name was Frank Smith, they kind of were like, we're just gonna watch these motherfuckers, and like kept their hands on their guns, kind of thing, because they thought that they had come to get him. You know what I mean? They didn't trust him. Now, basically, as soon as Jim Webb was distracted for 1 second, basically what Bass Reeves did was he jumped up from the table. They were all sitting at the table, I think, and he took his big ass hand, which was like a fucking catcher's mitt, apparently, like according to everybody that knew him, and he had like super long arms too. They said like a real long reach.
He's much bigger than everybody else in the photos.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like you can, like I said, 6'2". I think he was 180 pounds, which, like I said, is not big by today's standards, but back then it was like that was a big dude.
And physical standards of performance are very low in the 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
Dudes were fucking. You look at them. There's a lot of signs of malnutrition, protein, fucking starvation.
Well, yeah.
Their shoulders are real narrow. That's early childhood diet. You know, we're lacking protein and shit. Fucking Bass looks like he looks like a professional athlete. You know, that's what he looks like. If you were to fucking put him in a gym, you know, he'd look like a Bass football player. But you know, 1800s, most people were kind of thin. But his frame, he had a big old frame on him.
Yeah.
So
and like I said, big hands, long arms.
Yeah, so he's much stronger than the average dude of his era. And you know, he could use it. He's evidently fast. All the descriptions I've heard of the shit that he did would take a lot of physical speed.
Yeah. Well, they said he was super fast.
Yeah.
Like there really wasn't anybody faster than him.
He was a big dude and he was fast. And he could shoot straight.
Yeah.
And he was cool under fire.
I think that's kind of what saved his ass, honestly. Was just, like I said, he didn't get upset.
He didn't get rattled.
He didn't get emotional. Yeah, he didn't get rattled. Like, he just kept his fucking cool at all times.
In the face of fire.
Yeah.
You know, they're shooting at him and he'd fucking stay cool.
Yeah, because in this situation, like, he jumps up from the table, he puts his big-ass fucking mitt around Jim Webb's throat and pulls the gun on him like that, just like immediately. Now, the other dude shoots at Bass Reeves, but misses, like, he goes, like, way wide. And then, basically, like, Reeves just goes, bam, and like that, and just, like, fucking shot the dude. And felled him, like, with one shot. Jim Webb kind of peed his pants at that point, like, you know, metaphorically at least, and he's just kind of like, okay, well, I guess I'm fucking that's all she wrote. So Bass Reeves brought him in. So they take him back to the jail in Fort Smith, which there was like a courthouse, and then like the jail was underneath it, like in the basement, and they called it Hell on the Border because they said that was like the most horrible fucking shit. It was all one big room. With like, it was all moldy and shit like that, and everybody was just like chained together, and there was like always like a whole bunch of people in there like super packed together, and they're like, it was just awful, and it smelled so bad. They're like, it smelled so bad that it would like drift up into the courtroom all the time, and they had to keep putting sawdust down because of the stench. So there was that. So he brings Jim Webb back, and they threw him in there. Now Frank Smith, the other guy, he had been shot in the gut, like Bass Reeves shot him in the gut. And so by the time that the posse got him to, you know, where they were going, he was already dead. And that's where they buried him. So Jim Webb was in jail for almost a year. Now, two of his buddies, including the guy that owned the general store where he would run away to later, like, came up with his bond, which was $17,000, like, in back then money, which is an amazing amount. So he fucking skipped out. Like, he took off once his bond was paid. So once he escaped, they sent Bass Reeves back out to look for him because he was, you know, a fugitive, obviously, and he was kind of a bad guy. So, like I said, at this stage, they come to Bywater's store, and Bass Reeves and his companion are kind of looking at the store. And the guy, Cantrell, who was his posse man, he kind of sneaks up to the building and like looks in the window to make sure that Jim Webb is in there, and he is. Now, Cantrell, at this point, like kind of motions, like he's in there, you know what I mean? Like kind of thing. But I guess like Jim Webb was looking out the window and saw Bass Reeves like coming toward him. So Jim jumps out the fucking window, like in the back of the store, like trying to escape. And he goes for his horse. But at this point, like, Reeves kind of cut off his escape. And so Jim, like, runs over to, like, hide behind some bushes or something like that, and then, like, starts shooting. Now, this is okay. So this is where it might be a little bit exact. This did happen. There were a lot of witnesses, like the dude that owned the store, and like there were a bunch of other people around who saw this happen. But basically, so the bullets, because Jim Webb is shooting at Bass Reeves. He hits him in the hat, like it went through the brim of his hat. He shot a button off his coat, evidently. He shot the bridle, like on his horse, like it, chopped it in half. Did that. And so there was that. And apparently Bass Reeves just stayed totally chill, like the whole entire time, while fucking bullets going ever, like bouncing off his fucking clothes and whatever. So he very calmly gets off his horse, gets his Winchester, and, again, shit like flying at him everywhere. And he just like aims at the dude very calmly and just goes blam, blam, and shot the dude twice. He shot him in the chest and in the gut.
I remember reading some stuff that evidently Wild Bill Hickok said about gunfighting, which he had been in a few, but mostly was known as a trick shot. He said that the secret to it was to remain totally unfazed by live fire.
Yeah.
And to stand there and accurately deliver fire back onto your enemy. Said that people who couldn't stay cool would try to move too fast and fumble.
Yeah.
And miss shit. He said you had to take your time in a hurry.
Yeah, I get it.
You know what I'm talking about? Nowadays in the business, they would say, slow is fast. No. Smooth is fast and fast is smooth. Don't try to... take your time. Just do it in a hurry.
Yeah, like don't get your ass shot, obviously.
Yeah.
But it does seem...
smooth.
Bass Reeves does seem like the epitome of that exact maxim.
Yeah.
If you want to say that. Because it's like, he just seemed like, from everything that I read about him, he seemed completely cool under fire. Like I said, he's being shot at and stuff like that, and he just very calmly gets up and very calmly aims
and fires.
And he hit the dude twice. Yeah. Right? Once in the gut and once in the chest.
Yeah.
And this, Tom brought this up before. So after he shoots him twice, obviously Jim falls to the ground, and then Bass Reeves goes over to him. And a bunch of other people came over, like his posse and everything like that. So like I said, there were like witnesses to this. Like I said, this might be exaggerated because the story goes that he shot Jim Webb from 500 yards. I've also heard 600 yards. But
bullshit.
The type of gun that he was using, everybody I've seen that knows about that type of weapon is just like, there's no fucking way.
No fucking way. I'm experienced in this, right? The M16A2 rifle, also the A4, the A3, whatever. The maximum effective range is 300 meters. That's far less than 500 yards. At 300 meters, a man is half the width of the front blade sight when you're looking down through the sight picture. That's how far away. A man is tiny at 300.
Yeah.
At 500, he would be 1/3 the width of your front blade sight if you're looking down the sights, through the sights. How is he applying deadly fire onto you with a pistol at 500 or 600 yards? He's not even a threat to you at 500 yards. He has almost a zero chance of hitting you at 500 yards with a pistol.
I mean, that's far.
Okay? That's far for a rifle. Now, what they used back then and what Bass is using.
I thought this was a rifle in this case.
And maybe it is a rifle. I don't know. When they show pictures of him, and then later when they talk about an accident that happened, they were talking about a lever action, a 4440 lever action repeater, which is a mechanical repeater with a tubular magazine underneath the barrel. And 4440 could carry a lot of rounds. Probably like 13 rounds. Maybe 12, 13. I don't remember off the top of my head. But they're pistol cartridges, basically. They're not really meant to be shot out behind further than 100 yards. Now, I don't know if this was 45-70 or I don't know what caliber he's talking about. It's not mentioned in the story. Is it?
Not that I have written down,
heard
but it might be. It might be.
Still,
I know it was a Winchester.
They're talking
that's
about
all I know.
engagement with an enemy that's carrying a pistol.
Yeah.
He would not be a threat to you at 500 yards.
Yeah.
So what they're talking about is probably more like 50 yards.
Yeah, maybe somebody just
25. 50 is long range for a pistol. 25 is kind of long. Most pistol combat happens at touching distance. You can touch the person.
Right.
That's how far. Most of it is at that distance. Some of it's inside a room, 20 feet, 30 feet.
Yeah, I kind of feel like most people. Now, I will note that, and this is probably exaggerated too, but like a lot of people said that, and this is, I'm paraphrasing, but that Bass Reeves could shoot, what did they say? He could shoot a leg off a fly, off a mule's ear, without ruffling the hair.
Yeah, bullshit.
Yeah.
They're just mean he was very good. He was a very good shot.
Well, by all accounts, he was an excellent marksman. Excellent.
Each kind of weapon has its own shot pattern.
Yeah.
Its minute of angle shot pattern. What MOA it shoots. A 1 MOA rifle shoots a 1-inch diameter circle at 100 meters. Okay. That's fucking 1 MOA. That's fucking target rifle shit. Things like repeating rifles of the 1800s with black powder cartridges, you're probably talking about 4 MOA. So 500 yards, 5 times 4, 4 is 8, 16, 12, right?
What?
12 inch. 5 times 4 is what? No.
20.
20. 5 times 4 is 20? Okay, so 20 inch, that's right, 10 and 10. So 5 MOA rifle shoots a 20 inch diameter circle at 500 meters. So that means your shot, even if it's perfect, is not assured a hit.
Right.
So you can't shoot a fucking leg off of a fucking fly on it. No. It's going to be a 20-inch circle the size of a fucking big, large fucking pie, pizza pan pie.
Right.
It's going to hit somewhere in there.
A pizza pan.
At 500, at 500 meters. You know, 500 is long.
That's a lot. It's
1,000 is even longer. You know what I mean? But they have some snipers with sniper grade material that can make 1,000-yard shot.
I mean, that's different though, because that's a different firearm.
Yeah,
and that's like made specifically
that's a modern
for that.
firearm.
Right. That's
We're
what
not
I'm saying.
talking about modern firearms.
Yeah, we're talking about like the late 19th century.
Yeah.
Which weren't super accurate to begin with.
Like I said, the Old West scene, even back in the day, they lied their asses off.
Sure.
I got a feeling that fucking Bass didn't make this claim. Other people who were there, this story made.
Like
this
I said,
claim.
well, a lot of people were there, and I kind of feel like
but it was
a lot
like
of
a game
people.
Of telephone.
Yeah, I kind of feel
as
like
time
that's what
went
happened.
on, more and more was added.
They
to
kept
it.
adding like distance.
This engagement and the rest and shit. How much you want to bet? It was a rifle shot, but it was only fucking 35
well,
yards.
I was picturing, like, because it's a general store where the dude was hiding.
Yeah.
The dude jumps out the window, evidently, according to the witnesses, and then, like, hides in some bushes and But I thought, I mean, Bass Reeves had to have been fairly close for Jim Webb to have looked out the window and recognized him, like, coming up in the yard or whatever of this store. So it's like it couldn't have been that fucking far.
No.
Couldn't have been that
He's
fucking
doing
far.
an arrest. It's close range.
Yeah. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
And the rifle they're talking about is probably a mechanical repeating rifle. In 4440 is probably what they're talking about.
Like I said, I pictured more like 30 to 50 yards.
Yeah.
Is what I pictured.
That's perfect for a mechanical repeater. A lever action, mechanical repeating carbine is probably what it was. He probably same ammo in the pistol as you take in your rifle.
Yeah.
That way you're not dealing with two different calibers.
Right, yeah.
So that's probably
and that's what he generally used for that for that reason.
Yeah, 4440 was very popular, and mechanical repeating rifles. Like I said, some of them had 12, 13 round tubular magazines. That was the AK-47 of the day. You know what I mean? Nothing else had that amount of firepower.
Yeah.
Where you could put 13 rounds downrange without having to reload it. And reloading was quick. Had a little loading gate. You could slip them directly into the damn. So you fire off 5 rounds and then grab into your pistol belt where you have all that ammo and put 5 rounds back in the magazine mechanically in a lull in the fire. You have a lull in the firefight. Guy shoots 3 or 4 rounds and runs. Hides in the house. You got a few seconds to slip another couple rounds in that side gate. You know what I mean? To keep your magazine topped off.
Yeah.
So they're doing that. It was a real mechanical carbines were real good in a gunfight against, especially if you're against dudes that have pistols. You have a huge advantage.
Yeah.
They got 6 shots. And it's a slower reload.
Yeah.
You got to fucking. They didn't have swing out cylinders usually most of the time, depending on what year it was. You had to open a loading gate, rotate the free cylinder, and it had a rod underneath the fucking barrel that you had to hit each time to eject each case. And then once it was all empty, you then had to put one round at a time and then rotate the cylinder and fill every one of them. And then close the gate and cock the hammer. So reloading was slow on even on all those pistols back then. So something like something that carried 15 rounds that you could reload it easily like a carbine, you'd tear those dudes up.
Yeah.
That's why they carried 2-3 pistols. Because you didn't have time to reload in combat.
Right. Well, he usually carried 2 pistols as well.
Yeah.
But I think that, and he was a big fan of this action.
Yeah. Now they would
Cross draw.
They would carry 2 in their hands, but usually they only shot 1.
Yeah.
When that ran dry, they put it back in the holster and then swapped and put the other one in the other hand. They weren't shooting in the cowboy movies like, one out of each, pow, 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 pow. No, going right hand.
That looks
to left
good
hand.
in the movies.
Yeah,
but...
it just looks good in the movies. Dudes like Wild Bill could do it. They were trick shots.
Yeah.
They could shoot with the right or the left hand equally, but most people can't do that.
He could. Bass Reeves could. He was
could.
ambidextrous.
He's ambidextrous, okay.
Yeah.
Most dudes weren't. They might have a gun
I
in
forgot
each
to mention
hand,
that.
but they're only shooting with the one in the right hand.
Yeah.
And when it shoots dry, they put it in a holster and fucking just swap over.
Yeah.
Because you don't have 6 shots, 5 sometimes. Some of those pistols only carried 5 rounds. That's 10 rounds when you get 2 pistols.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. Actually, Bass Reeves could shoot equally well with either hand.
Yeah, he was trained up.
Yeah.
Trained himself up.
Yep. So I don't know if he was like, but usually he was more like a motherfucker. I'm gonna grab you with the throat and then I'm gonna shoot this other motherfucker back here.
Yeah.
Like that was kind of more his speed. But you know what I mean. I don't know if he was so much known for using 2 hands for guns. One was for strangling, one was for shooting. But yeah, so he shoots the dude, chest and gut, and then he goes up to the dude. He wasn't killed outright, and he goes up to Jim Webb, who was kind of a famous outlaw, right? And apparently, this is what Jim Webb said while he was dying. He said, "Give me your hand, Bass." So, Bass gave him his hand. It's like, and he clutched his hand like that. And he said, "I want you to take my revolver and the scabbard as a present, and you must accept them. Take it, for with it I have killed 11 men, 4 of them in the Indian Territory, and I expected you to be the 12th." So he gave him his gun and the scabbard, and apparently out of respect, like he called him a brave man, and he gave him that. He's like, "Hey, you got me," you know what I mean? Which, fair enough. And like I said, this dude was a well-known like white supremacist, and so that was kind of cool that he kind of gave him that respect. Whether that story's true or not, I don't really know, but that's like a very popular story about him, because that's kind of one of the biggest gunfights that he had, or one of the most famous gunfights that he had. So let's talk a little bit about this spot of trouble that he got into. Now, this happened the same year as him killing Jim Webb, was 1884. Now, they were in, going through the Chickasaw Nation. They had, it was him and his posse, and they had a bunch of prisoners with them that they were taking back. So they were all like all these dudes chained together, like at the campsite or whatever. What ended up happening, this was in April of 1884. Reeves ended up probably accidentally shooting his cook, William Leach.
It was another black dude.
It was another black guy, yeah. Well, and he had been with him for a while. Like, they were friends, and apparently they got along pretty well. So they're all camped out. It's nighttime, and they're all sitting around the fire like you do. Now, there's different stories about how this happened. Some of the stories said that Bass Reeves made some kind of crack about William Leach's cooking, which I guess they were just kind of fucking around. But allegedly, William Leach got upset about it. They had this big fight, and then Leach got mad and decided he was going to take it out on Pookie.
Yeah.
That he
Bringing
was
the fat girl up here.
Hey, don't
Bringing
call
the fat girl up
don't
here.
call her that. That's mean. Do
Girl
you hear
fat,
that
she's
shit?
the size of a pumpkin.
She's
She's like a little
not.
pumpkin. Get back to the show.
I do like to call her like a little meatloaf though.
Yeah. That cat weighs a lot. That
I call her little
Pick her up and say,
meatloaf.
God damn. When Anastasia's here, the girl we were on the show last time, she fucking picked that cat up. She goes, yeah, that cat's fat. She's like, ugh.
She's just dense.
Yeah.
She's very dense. But yeah, she's like, I don't give a shit.
She didn't give a shit. Her job is just to be cool and walk around the house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm just gonna run around
that's what you do. You
and be
cool
cute.
and walk around.
Yeah, you are cute. But yeah, so apparently, like I said, I don't know if this is how it really happened. I kind of doubt it. But so, the story is Bass Reeves was a big animal lover, and at some point prior to this, he had actually either killed a dude or arrested a dude that was fucking with a dog that was beating a dog, like a mother dog that had just had puppies, and he actually found homes for the dog for the mother and all the puppies, but he kept one of the puppies for himself. So evidently this puppy is at the campsite. And because the cook was pissed off that Bass Reeves was giving him shit about his cooking, the cook decides that he's going to take this pan of hot oil and pour it down the puppy's throat. Like I said, I don't know if this is what happened, but this is one of the stories that's going
there's
around.
two different stories.
There's a couple of, there's like 3 or 4 different stories.
Third story is that none of this happened.
Well, yeah, like I said, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
So that story says the cook did that. Like, he's going to take it on the puppy. The puppy died, obviously, I'm sorry to say.
In that story.
In this story.
Yeah.
But like I said, I don't think that really happened. And, you know, at this point, like, Bass Reeves decides he's going to go fucking John Wick on the motherfucker and shot at him. So that's one version of the story. In another version of the story, it was like the other way around, that the dog was in camp and that it didn't belong to Bass Reeves, and that it was licking out of some pot that they were supposed to be eating out of, and Bass Reeves said, I'm going to kill that dog, and then the cook tried to defend the dog, at which point they got into a fight. I don't really believe this, because from everything that I've heard, Bass Reeves was like a huge animal lover, so I don't really think he would have done anything like this. I don't think either of these stories are true.
Yeah, I don't believe either one of them are true. I'm gonna tell you why I don't think they're true. Both of these stories, and these are stories from back in the day.
Yeah, they were published in some of the papers.
Attacking and protecting a dog. There's a reason for that. It's because dudes of the fucking old West loved dogs.
Yeah.
Both sides of the law. So if it was common to abuse dogs, stories like this would not be out there.
Right.
Wouldn't be invented. I don't think either one of you had Bass Reeves supporters probably made one story up. Bass Reeves detractors made the other story up.
Yeah, I'm imagining that's probably what happened.
I don't think either one of these stories happened.
I don't think either one of those
because
is true.
they're not really mentioned in the trial.
I mean, yeah. And the thing about it, people that said bad shit about Bass Reeves at the trial, all of the people, like the prosecution witnesses, were criminals that he had brought in.
Yeah.
So probably had reason to like say bad shit.
Yeah, the witnesses were the dudes they had chained up.
Right.
Because it happened around a campfire.
And even the dudes that had cause to lie about him said that after it happened, because he didn't kill the dude outright. He shot it and it went in his neck, like it kind of winged the side of his neck.
Yeah.
And he fell, and by all accounts, even for the prosecution witnesses, said immediately Bass Reeves ran over there and tried to help him, and then said, we need to go get a doctor. They were kind of far away from, and he sent a couple of the dudes out to the next town to see if they could get the doctor to bring him back.
Right there is an accident.
That's what I mean. So at the trial, because the trial didn't happen, the weird thing about it is, so this happens. Now, the dude, the cook, William Leach, he died, I think the next day or a couple of days later. Because he just kind of, like I said, been winged in the neck. Yeah. That's another reason that I don't think it was on purpose. Because I'm like, look, if Bass Reeves wanted you dead, you'd be dead. I don't think he would any of this bullshit. 1884.
84. Okay.
1884. This happened.
All right, that was a weird time for guns. Now, Reeves had a different explanation of what happened at the trial. and me knowing about guns and knowing a little bit about the guns that he's talking about, I've never owned one, all right, but I know how they work. His version of what happened sounds a lot more plausible.
Yeah.
I can't come up with anything other than what he said, all right, because I don't know whether he was talking about a rimfire 4440 or a centerfire 4440 case, because that could change the rules. He said he had the action opened because he had accidentally loaded a 45 Colt round. I guess 45, some kind of 45 round. He didn't say 45 Colt.
He did have a 45 Colt though.
Okay, then it must have been centerfire.
Yeah.
He had a 45 Colt cartridge. He put it into the magazine by accident. They're about the same size as 4440. And try to jack that into the chamber, and it goes in a little bit, and then the bullet just mashes on the damn throat of that cartridge, because it's a 4440 is a bottleneck case. It's fat at the base like a 45, and it gets narrows down to 44 caliber. The 45 will go in the magazine, but it won't go in the chamber. It'll just stuff and kind of crush in there. And he tried to eject it, and when you pull down on the lever, the bolt goes to the rear, but it's so mashed in there that the extractor on the bolt lets go of the bolt of the case, and it just stays in the case, in the chamber. He said he had a knife, and he was trying to pry it out of the chamber, and he thinks the other end of the knife touched the trigger and touched it off.
Yeah.
Which
Because they were just sitting around the fire.
Right. Which that means a couple different things. If it was a rimfire case, could have been that crimping the rim might have fucking set it off, because that's where the priming compound is. If it was a centerfire case, I don't really know. I don't really understand how it could have happened. Maybe the bolt did not let go of the case, because the firing pin would have to contact the primer in the center of the cartridge, which means that he pulled out a little bit, but the base of the case was still touching the front of the bolt face. And he said he pulled the trigger. Maybe the other end of it pulled the trigger and set it off. There's a problem with that. If the case is unsupported by the fucking chamber wall because it's pulled out, the explosion would happen and it would just blow a bunch of fucking, an explosion and a bunch of case fragments out the ejection port, which is on the top on this rifle. And the bullet would just be stuck there in the fucking barrel. It wouldn't go the other end because there's no pressure. So that couldn't have been what happened. That's why I was very confused. It must be that that he shut the cartridge into the breech, but wasn't able to open it all the way. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
You see, because if it's open and you pull the trigger, nothing happens, because there's a sear that would disconnect. It's all, these mechanical parts all have to fit together. So the bolt must have been closed with a 45 round in a 4440 cartridge, which meant that the hammer would have been cocked still. I was thinking that what he was talking about is that it was a rimfire case. So he's got a knife in there, and he pulls on the fucking rim and sets off the fucking, because in a rimfire case, the priming compound has been rolled inside the rim as the case is formed. And if you if you mash the back of it along the rim, just like on a 22 rimfire, it'll set the case off. There's no primer in the middle. It's all in that rim. I think it might have been rimfire cartridges is what they're talking about.
So it could have happened, is what you're saying. Because
could have happened, but
there, apparently on YouTube, there is a guy who knows a lot about firearms from this era.
Yeah.
Who was able to replicate what might have happened.
Okay. Well, if he's an expert on this era, then he's probably right. I'm not an expert on this era, and I don't know exactly which 45 they're talking about.
Right.
45 rimfire or 45 Colt, which is centerfire. It's different. Same, they come from different eras, but in the late 1880s, all of those were out there, because you had some people had old guns.
Right.
You just didn't throw a gun away. It might only be 5 years old. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's a rimfire. That's the old shit. That's the old school shit. Whatever. But if he could replicate it, then it's probably true.
I mean, yeah, I believe
true.
that it has been replicated.
Okay.
Like kind of what he was talking
Bass
about.
does not strike me as a dude that would lie. And if he wanted to do dead, he would know how to do it the right way.
That's what I'm saying. It's just kind of like, now he did admit, here's the weird thing. So after the cook died, and like I said, one, it seems unlikely that if he really shot the dude, like on purpose, he would immediately go and try to help him and like, oh my God, go get a doctor and all this other kind of stuff. And like I said, if he was really mad at you and wanted you dead, you'd be dead. I don't believe in any of this. He wouldn't do a little wingy in the neck or any of that kind of shit. You know what I mean? He would just kill you. So I kind of feel like it was probably just an accident, like he said. And like I said, it did admit later on that they had argued earlier, but that it was just like bullshit. Like it didn't really mean anything. They kind of fucked with each other all the time. It wasn't, and he'd been his cook for a long time and they were friends. So it's like, it didn't really mean that much of anything. So, I mean, I kind of get that. So the stories about the puppies and stuff, I don't think that's true, because there was a lot of stuff that came out prior to the trial where people were trying to like smear him and shit like that. And it's kind of a testament to how beloved he was that a lot of the smearing campaign didn't really work, because people actually knew him in person and be like, that doesn't sound like shit he would do. You know what I mean? So, like I said, again, a testament to how respected he was, that a lot of people, all this bullshit was printed and people didn't really believe it. So the thing about it, okay, here's what's weird. Like, so he kills his cook, allegedly accidentally. I kind of believe it was probably just an accident. And nothing happened for 2 years. Like, he wasn't put on trial for it or nothing like that. Like, 2 years, he just went back to work. Like, well, I mean, he was fucked up about it because that was his friend and he felt bad. But, you know, he's like, okay, well, you know, more fucking fugitives I gotta go catch, you know what I mean? So he just worked for 2 years and, like, it was fine, like, just like normal. But then, in early 1886, like 2 years later, a new guy came in. The president, who was Grover Cleveland at that time, he actually appointed a new U.S. Marshal, whose name was John Carroll, who was a former Confederate veteran. So it's surmised, perhaps, that because this kind of former Confederate had come in and he's just kind of like, well, I don't really like this Bass Reeves person, so we're gonna arrest him for first-degree murder 2 years later. So they did. And he was actually in jail for 6 months before he could get the bail money together. And the story was that they put him in the jail, like under Fort Smith, which they called Hell on the Border, like I said, where everybody was chained together and it stunk and it was moldy and there was shit everywhere. I don't know if that's the case or not. But the fact, if they put him down there in General Pop with like all the other fucking, holy crap, like how the fuck did he survive that?
Well, he's big.
Yeah, because I'm sure he probably put some of those people in there, and they're just like, hey, motherfucker.
Turnover was pretty fast probably back then. They didn't wait trial that long. So imagine that the dudes that he put, that he arrested probably were either executed or sentenced by the time he got there.
Maybe so.
Yeah,
I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if he was put in General Pop or if he kind of got, because he had like, you know, friends in high places and stuff, but the fact that he had to spend 6 months in jail, like, to get the bail money together.
They probably took him out of there as a trustee.
I would imagine. Yeah. Like I said, I don't really know. But I have heard that he did do some time down there.
Yeah.
So they finally did the trial in October of 1887. Now, as I said, prior to this, the media was trying to smear him all over the place. This is where the puppy stories came from. And they just said all kind of stuff like, yeah, he shot him on purpose, and it's like they had this big fight. There were like even other stories about it. But they were just trying to make him look as bad as possible.
Well, not all of them.
Not all of them. It depended on what paper it was.
Right, yeah. Because you got to remember, some of the papers were saying, no, he was defending a puppy, what that dude did to that puppy.
Like I said, he went John Wick.
So they're trying to justify it. Why he
Which, like I said,
dude.
If you did that to a puppy, you deserve to get fucking shot in the face. I'm sorry.
Pouring fucking hot oil down the puppy's throat.
That's what I mean.
But like, that didn't happen.
No, I don't think that happened.
The reason why they made that up, like I said, fucking guys in the West love fucking dogs. You know what I mean? This is,
I kind of feel like everybody
this is Indian
loves
territory
dogs.
in the South.
Yeah.
No.
I don't think anybody would do that.
No.
The only person that would do that is a psychopath. And I'm not saying they didn't have psychopaths back then, but
you could get killed over a dog in the Old West.
And rightfully
in the South.
so.
Yeah.
Like I said.
You shot a man's dog, he'd probably kill you.
If I saw somebody doing that to
Yeah.
a puppy, I would
Yeah.
absolutely shoot you in the face.
It's kind of like that for horses, though, too.
You deserve it.
Yeah.
Because that is fucked up.
If you shot a man's horse for no reason, he'd probably kill you.
And again, like I said, they would be justified in
Yeah.
doing so. Especially back then, because your horse was kind of like...
Yeah.
You know, you'd be stuck out in the fucking range with no horse. You'd be screwed.
Now, if you're in a gunfight, you know what I mean, you just robbed a bank and your horse got hit, that dude can't blame
Well,
you
that's
for
a
that,
different
you know.
situation.
But he just, I don't like your horse, and shot your horse like it, you'd be a dead man.
Oh, yeah, big time.
Because those dudes were fucking emotionally connected to their dogs and their horses. That was like family.
Yeah. Well, like I said.
Yeah.
Rightfully so. I don't...
Yeah.
I hope this puppy thing never happened. Because,
Nah, it didn't happen.
Because that's messed up. Either story is fucked up, but I don't think either one happened. I think they were both published on different sides of, like, people just trying to, like, make it more salacious or whatever. I think...
supporter and detractor.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I think the truth was pretty close to what Bass Reeves said when because he testified on his own behalf.
So weapons
and he
malfunction.
explained what happened, and that sounded pretty plausible to me. It was just an accident. Like I said, if he'd wanted to kill the dude... He had ample opportunity. The guy was with him all the time for months at a time. He was his cook. So, you know, if he was mad at him, he could have just fucking shot him whenever he wanted to. Like, why would he just fucking wing him and then call a doctor?
He's trying to clear a fucking stuck cartridge.
Yeah, like I said, it just seemed like an accident. And he seemed pretty fucked up about it afterward.
Yeah.
So, despite all of the shit in the media, the fact that all of the prosecution witnesses, as far as I know, were basically criminals that he was bringing in. So not the most believable people. And he actually had some really good lawyers, and he actually had a lot of good people like speaking in his defense. And happily, the almost all white jury, I believe there was at least one black man on the jury, but it was mostly white jury. They exonerated him, not guilty. They thought it was an accident. And probably, like I said, rightly so. So he was released, which is good. Problem was, though, that remember how I said earlier that Bass Reeves, like, because of his long and, very awesome career, had, he wasn't wealthy, but he was comfortable. Like, he had a nice big house, big family. Like, he made really good money. His legal fees for this basically cleaned him out. He had to sell his house, and him and his family had to move to like a much less grand place.
He made the equivalent of over $100,000.
It was a lot of money. He made a lot of money.
Right, so that would have put him in the lower upper class.
Yeah, he was
above middle class.
He was doing really well.
Yeah.
But all the legal fees from this bullshit.
Yeah. They lawfared his ass.
Yeah, he wasn't destitute, but he had to sell his big house, and he downsized a lot like after this, and he never got the money back like he did. So it cleaned him out like pretty good. So, which, that kind of sucked. And it was kind of like downhill after that. And I kind of feel like he had a few bad blows after that. Like his first wife died of cancer. I believe she was 56. And then Isaac Parker, the judge that had been like one of his biggest advocates, he also died either the same year or like a little time
Parker
afterward.
was known as the hanging judge.
Yeah, I said that earlier.
Yeah. And which they had kind of have a, I don't know if they call him Parker, but the judge they're talking about is in shows up in 2 movies. One of them is Hang 'em High with Clint Eastwood. I think that was also the hanging judge.
Well, that's a pretty common epithet, like calling somebody a hanging judge.
All right.
Like if they're super hardcore and they're like, "Yep, death."
Okay, yeah.
Then they just call anybody a hanging judge.
Right. Yeah, and then the other hanging judge was the ghost from Frighteners. Remember the old man? His jaw kept falling off.
Like I said, that's a pretty common.
That was another the hanging judge
thing to call like super hardcore judges that sent everybody to the gallows was the hanging judge. So he wasn't the only one that was called that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So his life got a little bit or quite a lot like shittier after that. One of the other famous outlaws that he went after, though, was later on in 1890. And he went after this dude who was a Cherokee named Ned Christie. We should probably do a show on this dude because this dude is also
That sounds
fascinating.
familiar. Well, who is this again?
Yeah, he was a Cherokee
Okay,
guy.
yeah. Christie, yeah.
Now, he was, quite a famous outlaw, even though I'm not entirely sure that he did all the shit that he was accused of. I think probably not. There was a warrant out for his arrest because he had been accused of killing a Deputy U.S. Marshal named Dan Maples in 1887. Now, according to most historians that I looked into about this, Ned Christie probably did not do that shit. But, everybody thought he did, so he had to go on the lam. And honestly, he would not give himself up to the court because, probably correctly, he thought that he would not get a fair trial if the white man were judging him. So he's just like, yeah, fuck that, I'm getting out of here. So he basically had all these hideouts, like, up in the hills. Like, he would, like, build little forts,
Why
like,
would
up in
you
the mountains
risk
and
going
stuff.
to a trial?
Yeah, well, that's what he thought.
When you could just go to Indian territory.
Yeah, that's what he
out of
did.
their jurisdiction.
He's just like, fuck that.
Like, man, because that's going to cost me a lot of money. And if I don't pay the money, I'll get found guilty.
And he's like, and I'll probably get found guilty anyway.
Yeah, right.
Which he was probably right about.
I
don't blame him.
I'm kind of agree with him. Yeah, man.
I don't
Fuck
blame
that, man. Go into Indian territory.
I mean, if that was me,
yeah.
like, if I was Native American at this time period and, like, I didn't even do that shit, but they accused me of doing that shit, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go hide.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just, like, I'm not going to trust that, like, people are going to do the right thing. You know what I
This goes
mean?
back
No
to what
way.
I said earlier on in
No
the show.
way.
The difference between Hollywood Indians from the fucking 50s and fucking even later on in the 70s, all right, was fucking far away from the truth of the way Indians really were in this time. They were like anybody else.
Well, yeah, of course.
A lot of them just wore regular clothes, white man's clothes, if they want to call them. His last name was Christie. A lot of them were part white or part black. They went into town. They spoke more than one language. They were like the people you would meet in the Southwest or in the South today. It's like the Indians you'd meet today.
Yeah.
They were like that. Just that they had tribal areas.
Yeah.
And they would dress up in tribal stuff. Some of them lived like that too, depending on what year it was. But they do that today.
Yeah.
You could go to these tribal places and they're wearing traditional clothing and going through dances and stuff. You can see it all on YouTube. And that's who they're talking about.
But I think people don't. People were adaptable. I mean, you just kind of had to roll with whatever.
Indians had money. They had guns. They
That's
had
it.
horses. They were like anybody else at the time. Yeah. Just that they were from here. They were here for a long, long time.
Yeah.
But they changed with the times along with everybody else, pretty much.
Sure, just like everyone does.
They were modern. You look at the fucking. They were modern for those days. But if you look at Hollywood, in the 50s, they're showing Indians in the Stone Age.
Yeah, like
that's not the way they were. They might have
Which,
been
like I said, I kind of feel like that's why a lot of people nowadays find it so offensive. Which it is offensive because they're
It's not
othering.
accurate.
Yeah, they're othering them. They're
Yeah.
they're making them like not
Yeah.
not like they were. It's completely unrealistic.
One of the first colonists here, Joseph Smith, he shows up with this fucking new English colony, and he's in the fucking New World. I think that might have been Virginia or some shit. I don't remember.
Who, John Smith you're talking about?
Yeah, it was his name, John Smith. Yeah.
Yeah.
And meets a dude named Squanto. And Squanto's fresh back from England.
Yeah.
It's like, what the fuck? He speaks English.
What's
Yeah, I was in England for fucking a long time. I fucking
Yeah.
met the Queen. I was fucking drinking. Fuck that shit. I came back home.
Yeah.
Says, my people are all dead. They got killed in a fucking plague, So,
I felt bad for poor
yeah.
Squanto.
And then Squanto comes back to his people and tries to tell them that, no, these white people, they make these big buildings out of stone. They got stone roads. They didn't believe him. They didn't have
Get the
photography.
fuck out of here
Get
with
the fuck
that.
out of here. Wait a minute. Oh, yeah. But you got to understand the times. I mean, there was no photography.
Right.
So you couldn't say, no, this is where the white people come from. This is the honky motherland. Everything's stone.
That's like somebody
"Get the
coming
fuck
back
outta
and
here."
saying they saw like
Yeah,
Bigfoot or something.
But don't fucking believe the bullshit. And a lot of the bullshit is based on Hollywood movies about the way the Indians were. They mostly whipped white man's ass. They fucking the U.S. Army mostly got its ass kicked
Yeah, true.
by the Indians.
True.
All this, the white man had guns and shit. Guns weren't worth shit until they were fucking metallic cartridge case. And then the Indians, we'll use that. when the white man first showed up, it was all matchlocks.
Yeah.
And then later on, flintlocks.
Which
bows
sucked.
they sucked. Bows were much better.
Yeah.
Much better. So it was just endless waves of immigration, of white immigration into the Americas.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, they just eventually got overwhelmed. But it took like a long time. It took a long time.
And by the time that happened, they were already basically part of the system.
Yeah.
Because they were in the game too. They were switching alliances between other.
Well, yeah, like I said, they were just
like everybody else. Yeah.
They were just doing what everyone else was doing,
Yeah.
like trying to like serve their own self-interest.
Yeah.
They're just like, well, what's going to be best for us and our family and our...
Yeah, should we ally ourselves with the French or should the English? You know, that was mostly what they were trying to figure out. Should we ally ourselves with the fucking Spanish or the new Mexican government? They were players like everybody else in the game.
Yeah. It does make me sad, like, seeing all those old movies because...
Yeah.
They did that bad with Native Americans too, like in Westerns, but it's like they did that with like pretty much every race that wasn't white.
Yeah.
Like up until, Jesus, the 50s or the 60s. Maybe even later.
Well, it shows the Indians as basically being helpless savages.
Yeah. Which
they were just being
they
mowed down.
obviously were not.
No, the Indians were fucking more competent. They kicked a lot of ass. Most people were scared of them. Now, not all Indians were the same. There were different tribes. I mean, and it was just like the differences between European tribes. Difference between the French and the fucking Bulgarians and the Poles, you know. Same difference. But they were kind of like at a medieval era. They were like the medieval era.
Yeah.
Which not that far different from the Victorian era. But, you know.
Yeah.
They were real self-sufficient people.
Well, like I said, they lived here for thousands of years.
Yeah. And it's not like they were defeated. Because, the white man came and defeated them. No. That's not how that happened. They just so-called defeated the Indians was looking motor cars, roads, and fences. You couldn't chase the buffalo anymore, and that was pretty much the end of the Indian lifestyle.
Well, yeah, you couldn't. I mean, you couldn't live the way they lived.
You can't live that way anymore
because we took over all their shit.
And it went right into the very end.
And made everything private property. Yeah. They did not have a concept of that.
I served with a bunch of them in the army, man. Fucking, and you know, they badasses. Islanders too, Micronesians, Samoans, Hawaiians, similar to the Indians in mentality. They're very macho. You're either a hunter or a fucking warrior, and you can't do that anymore unless you in the United States Army. So that's where they go.
Yeah.
Because that's what makes you a man in those cultures.
That's why there's so many of them in there.
That's why there's so many of them in there. They're fucking, American Indians are like fucking over represented in the United States Army.
Mm-hmm.
There's like they all go, basically all their men go. If they don't go, they're getting in trouble. But all their good dudes go.
Yeah. Yeah, which like I said, I think a lot of people don't know that.
Yep. Same thing with our Islanders. My friend Vernon Udasco. We went to basic together, went through the whole thing together. He left Hawaii, was an awesome soldier, never went back to the islands. Married a white girl. Why would he go back? All the jobs are here. And that's what happened to a lot of those Indians. Starting in World War II. They married white women, a lot of them.
Yeah.
And then generations later, they're just white people. That's what happened to a lot of them.
Yeah.
We probably got it in our DNA because our families have been here for so long in the South.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do my DNA test. I'm gonna get my honky pedigree. We're gonna see. I know there's some Middle Eastern blood in there.
I got my mom's side done, but I haven't got my dad's side done because my brothers would have to do it.
Right.
But I got my maternal one done.
I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna pay for mine. It's about $100, isn't it?
That's what it was when I did it.
All right, I'm gonna check it out.
Mine was like English Irish, but through Turkey.
Through Turkey, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like it was Turkey, people that came from Turkey into England.
My mother's father was half Assyrian Christian, which that's Iraq. But I think the Assyrians were more Greek than they were Middle Eastern. I think they were Christians. They were Catholics. So I don't know. So that's going to be in there.
You should do it. Like I said, it's probably easier nowadays because I did it a long time ago, and it's probably like way easier now.
Yeah.
And I did it through, I think, like, National Geographic. It wasn't even, but they have, like, 23andMe and whatever the other fuck that other one is called. I think it's $100, but
Oh, right.
that's what it was when I did it, and that was years ago. There might be more now. I don't know. But yeah, so Ned Christie, like I said. So he's accused of murdering this U.S. Marshal, which, like I said, I kind of feel like he probably didn't do it, but he got blamed for it anyway. So there was a warrant out for it, but he was just like, fuck that. I'm not like fucking, I didn't do it, so I'm not subjecting myself to you guys' justice because I don't trust you motherfuckers. And like I said, I don't blame him not one bit. So there was a warrant out for his arrest, however. So evidently, allegedly, this is something that they're not entirely sure if this happened or not, but apparently Bass Reeves did get the warrant for it. So they go to him and his posse. They go to Ned had a hideout. He had built essentially I've seen a photo of it. And it's like a fort. It looks like a cabin, but it's like reinforced. You know what I mean? It's like it's like 2 layers of logs and there was like all kind of sandbags like in between. And apparently he had it all stockpiled with like water and shit. And then there was like little things where you could shoot out of, like little gun turrets and shit like that. So if anybody came, because it was kind of like up in the mountains and stuff. So he had this whole thing that he built, like to fucking stave everyone off. So evidently, Bass Reeves and his posse found this fort. It was a fortified cabin, I guess, is more than a fort. And burned it down. It was in the papers. But like I said, I don't know if it was somebody made this shit up. Now, they thought that Ned Christie was in there, so they thought they had, like, burned him to death. But it found out, like, he turned up alive later on. So basically, he was just kind of like, damn you, Bass Reeves, and he said he was going to, like, get him, but he never did. Like, he actually got killed later by a different posse in 1892. But evidently, Bass Reeves did go up there and, like, try to get him and, like, burn his house down. So there was that. So here's the story that we mentioned earlier. And this is a story that a lot of people bring up when they talk about Bass Reeves's integrity. Because he would bring in anybody that he had a warrant for. Even, evidently, his son. So he had a bunch of kids, like we said. 11 kids is, the most common number given. A few of them died when they were younger, like, or teenagers or whatever. But he had a son named Benjamin, or Benny. He was one of the younger ones. And what happened was that Benjamin, his wife, he caught his wife in bed with another man. Now, at first, he didn't do anything. Like, he kind of forgave her, like, okay, well, shit happened. You know what I mean? Now, the story goes, I don't know if this is true or not. The story goes that he was, like, really sad about it, as I guess you would be. And he went and asked his dad, Bass Reeves, what would you do in my situation?
He gives the most Chad answer in a fucking world.
Yeah, see, I don't know. And maybe, I don't know. I didn't know the man personally. It doesn't sound like something he would say, but maybe it
sounds plausible. No, it sounds plausible.
He says, because he's like, Dad, what would you do
is the 1880s,
if you caught your wife in bed with another man? And Bass Reeves allegedly said, well, I would shoot him. And what did he say? Like,
he said, I beat her to the
beat the fear of God into her, or something like that.
Yeah.
Something like that.
He said, get a stick. He said, I get a stick and beat the fear.
I don't think he said get a stick, but he said something like beat the fear of God into her, or something like that.
He said, it fucked her up and killed that dude.
I don't know if he actually said that to his son or not, but that's what the story is.
That would have been the moral standard for the time.
That's true.
Because to tolerate it would have been considered to be immoral.
Right.
Oh, God. So, no, I think that's the way he did answer.
So, evidently, what happened after this conversation was that Benjamin Reeves, the son, caught his wife in bed with yet another man, like a different dude.
Oh, it was a different dude.
It was a different dude.
Okay. Yeah.
According to everything I read, it was a different dude.
Yeah.
So she was getting around. And he kind of took the advice, but he kind of switched it around because he actually beat the crap out of the dude. Like, the dude lived, but he shot his wife dead.
Yeah.
So there you go. So this happens, And a warrant, obviously, comes down for Benny's arrest. And they tell Bass Reeves about it, and they're like, bro, like, that's your kid. You know what I mean? They're like, we'll get somebody else on it. And Bass Reeves said, no, give it to me. He said, give it to me. I'm gonna go get him. You know, that's my job, and that's my kid. I kind of feel like we were talking about this when we were watching the documentary about last night. Like I said, I think that a lot of people bring this up, as I mentioned, as evidence of his integrity, because it's like, look, his son broke the law, and he went and got him just like he would go get any other criminal, which he did. But Tom said, you know what it might have been too, and I think that this is probably a factor also, is that he knew, well, he's like, well, if they sent somebody else, you never know, like, what might happen. Like, you know what I mean? So
They could probably kill him.
that's what I mean. So he was maybe having a little bit of a protective instinct too. He's like, well, at least if I go get him, then I know that he'll be brought in alive.
Yeah.
You know, and I'll know, like, what happened to him.
Because if he sends other detectives there or other deputies or what there, his son's going to draw on those guys.
Yeah,
and
because
they're gonna kill him.
Because by all accounts, his son was suicidal
Yeah.
after that, and might have tried to unalive himself.
Yeah, well, it would be suicide by cop.
Right, and so maybe that was a concern, and maybe
Bass
he
would have known
knew
about
that.
Bass would have known about that. Cops see that.
Right.
They're like, "Fuck it, I'm not going to jail. You got to kill me."
Yeah. So and I'm sure that's his son, even though he did a fucked up thing, and I'm sure he probably didn't want to see that happen.
Right.
So he's
He knew
like,
his son wasn't going to draw on him.
yeah. So he's like, well, I'm gonna go get him.
Right.
So there's two different versions of. I mean, he did pick his son up. There's records of it. Like there's records of the arrest, and you have to write down who it was that picked you up. And there's in his son's handwriting, it says, "Yeah, I was picked up by my dad, Bass Reeves, who was the U.S. Marshal." Blah de blah. But it's just the timeline that's kind of like some people said, well, that that the son turned himself into his dad the same day that the murder happened. The more common story is that he ran, the son, and that Bass Reeves spent about 2 weeks looking for him, and then like found him like sleeping out in the wilderness or whatever, and then brought him in. So as it turned out, his son was actually given a life sentence for murder, but he was released after, I believe, 11 years for good behavior. But by that time, Bass Reeves had already died. So he didn't actually see his son released. Although, the weird thing about it is that I saw some sources that said that he disowned his son. But I don't know if that's true, because they said that he visited him like all the time. Like he very regularly came and visited him and brought him stuff and everything like that. So I don't know if he necessarily disowned him, but he did come and visit him all the time. So I don't really know how that goes. But yeah, so his son did go to prison, and he was in there for 11 years, but then they let him out. And honestly, like after he was let out, he apparently lived a completely upstanding life and never committed a crime ever again. So I guess he learned his lesson. So I suppose that. But like I said, by the time he was let out, his dad was had already died. Also famously, Bass Reeves arrested his own church minister, who had just baptized him not that long before, because his minister was selling illegal alcohol.
Bootlegging.
Yeah, so he's just like, well, you're going to prison too, buddy.
Yeah.
Like he did. Like I said, he was very. I don't want to say he was a stickler, because that sounds like I'm shitting on him. I'm not. He was just very. He's like, well, this is the law, and if you break it, I don't care if you're my friend, or I don't care if you're my family or anything like that. You have to be subjected to the same laws as everyone else.
Yeah.
And that's what's fair.
Now,
And that's what he did.
This is before prohibition of alcohol.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the laws were for these counties and states. Was it that whiskey was banned, or was it? That...
think it was just whiskey. I'm not
entirely
sure though.
Now, so there was, but was there legal whiskey and illegal whiskey? That's
sure.
Okay, that was something I would have liked to have looked into, because they're in these stories, which they're not stories, are documented. In these arrest warrants, there's a lot of stuff about going after people who are making and selling whiskey. But that's kind of strange. I would think that whiskey would be legal. So, because it was before Prohibition. The only thing I can think of is that it must have been illegal in certain counties, or you had to have some kind of a license to make it. That was another thing. Could be that you needed a license to make whiskey for safety reasons. There must have been a bunch of people making bad whiskey. Because a lot of times what happens in the U.S. is that big companies want to protect their business and want to keep other people out of it. So they kind of pay to have certain laws passed, or they bring up the litigation to try to keep people out of the business that they're in. Saying, maybe that's what it was. Where you can't make whiskey and sell it unless you buy a certain license, and it's expensive, and the only people that can really afford to buy the license are professional companies that do it.
That would make sense.
That's
actually.
probably what it is. And they would probably try to justify it by saying there's bad whiskey out there making people blind.
Which was probably true.
That was probably true.
Because that fucking bathtub gin they used to make during fucking Prohibition, that was some fucked up shit.
Yeah, they would try to make wood grain alcohol.
Yeah, they made
take wood shavings.
Yep.
And make alcohol.
They put all kind of shit in there.
And then try to flavor it like it's whiskey. You get high as hell off of it. You get real drunk off of it. But you'll also go blind.
Yeah.
Over a period of time.
Is it worth it?
That form of alcohol is not meant to be ingested.
That's what happens when shit's unregulated.
Yeah. So it might have been shit like that. So I don't think whiskey was illegal. I think bootlegging was illegal. It's probably what
it was, yeah. And well, like in this area, you weren't actually, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you weren't allowed to sell booze of any kind in Indian territory.
Yeah. Taxes were involved.
That too.
And it could be that there was a lot of abuse of the Native Americans by selling them alcohol.
Yeah.
They didn't have a resistance to it.
Yeah, genetically they don't.
It's real easy for them to become alcoholic because they didn't go through the same crucible that white people back in Europe went through.
Who just like drank their faces off,
Yeah.
and all the ones that were like weak and couldn't take it, like they all died.
They all died. Okay. It was,
That's fucked up, but it's true.
Yeah, I read stuff that was old British stuff when they first started distilling alcohol. They made gin, and gin was literally a crack epidemic in the UK. They had woodcuts, pictures showing the fucking hood with women passed out with a baby next to them on the ground, and just all these. And evidently there'd be whole neighborhoods that were just fucked up on gin, and that they were dying from it.
Which wouldn't that be
Drinking
hilarious nowadays from gin of all things?
Right? And fucking you had British from the royal family like crying out like this is like a plague and it's gonna destroy the entire English race. And they were
shit never changes, I'm telling you.
Yeah. Gin must be banned. And I think gin was banned for a while.
It might have been.
I think it was.
It might, because that was kind of the one that they focused in on for whatever reason.
In the 1700s, crack was gin.
Yeah.
Or maybe the late 1600s, I think, when it came out. And it was something people just cooked up. And it was considered to be an illegal substance kind of, or an evil substance that was like crack.
Yeah.
Or meth. Something like that.
Like I said, people talk about, the crack epidemic and all that kind of stuff. Like all the shit about like the outrage in the media and all that stuff, that's not new. It's like they've done that for every thing that came out.
It was huge panic.
Yeah.
But there probably was something to it.
Well, there's always like a seed of truth to it, but obviously it's always way, way over exaggerated.
Europeans have always been drinkers. The water wasn't safe there. They didn't have, in the medieval era, the water was dangerous.
Yeah, you couldn't drink just water.
Shit was fucking dirty, man.
Yeah, it had shit in it.
Yeah, and fucking eels, dead eels in the fucking pipes and stuff. None of the water was fucking safe.
Who the fuck knew what was in there? You couldn't drink water, is what I'm saying.
Right, but beer was safe.
Yeah.
And so they would drink beer Because if the
all
beer,
all the time.
yeah, all the time. That
Breakfast,
was like a
lunch,
meal.
dinner. Yeah.
That was like a meal. They would have
You get up in the morning, you have a big
drink beer,
fucking
and you drink some
tankard
more
of it.
beer. Beer was like a fucking food group.
They had a beer. It was.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds funny, but it's true.
Yeah, it was liquid. It was liquid bread.
Liquid bread.
Liquid
Sure.
bread.
It was
With
kind of
alcohol.
considered sort of healthy.
Yeah, and then because it had alcohol in it, it was sanitary.
Yeah.
The bacteria, evil bacteria, were killed.
Like it wasn't as bad.
And
I
if
mean,
the
I'm
water
sure it
was real putrid, you couldn't make beer out of it. Come out fucking sour and nasty, so you wouldn't drink it. So white people, by the time the 1800s had rolled around, had developed some resistance to alcohol, but it killed off a lot of people to get there. They're descendants of people
yeah.
that survived it. Survived the fucking
Yes, our
gin
alcoholic
epidemic.
asses are the result of the bottleneck that came from all the
Yes.
people that died of alcohol.
Yeah, I
from
went to the
back then.
VA. And I went to the VA, and my general practitioner doctor, it was a woman. She's Islamic. I think she's from Egypt. And she's always asking me how much I'm drinking, and I fucking try to explain to her. I says it doesn't matter how much I drink. I'm white. It fucks her up. It fucks her up.
I can drink as much as I want to.
Says yeah, I'm of English, Irish, German, and Scots descent, and you know. And,
Although I gotta
we
tell
were
you,
born drinking, and fucking we don't. It doesn't affect us the same way.
not the same way, no.
Yeah.
Although I will say that, I can drink a moderate to a lot amount,
Yeah.
but when I was in the UK, those people could drink me
Yeah.
under the fucking table.
Yeah.
I was like flabbergasted.
When I was living in Boston, I had an Irish girlfriend from Cork.
Wow.
She's from Cork, Ireland, and that bitch could drink me underneath the fucking table.
Yeah.
She could drink. And
They
she,
can drink
she was
over
a
there, man.
Mean drunk when she get drunk. She'd go, "Fuck you, you son of a bitch." So who you saying fuck you? Fuck you. You know,
I kind of do that too.
She was just mean. Yeah,
I'm not
she
that.
would-
I'm not that.
She
mean.
get real mean. I had to leave her because she would. But when she wasn't drinking, she was normal. It's just
Right.
that she was a pub culture, and Boston has a pub culture.
Oh yeah,
because it's Boston is our version of London,
pretty much.
and it looks like London in a lot of ways, old London. Yeah. And it's got pubs everywhere.
Yeah.
Irish pubs.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a huge Irish population in
Yeah.
Boston.
yeah,
and
all
a
the
huge
cops are Irish.
Yeah, but like
It's
I don't
like
know about
their racial
nowadays.
duty
But
to be a cop.
yeah, it's a huge thing.
Yeah.
It's a huge thing. But yeah, it's just a massive drinking culture, massive pub culture. It's very
Yeah.
British in Boston.
Yeah, they come in and hang out, and it's just like, hey, it's all the regulars, and they're watching TV in there, and they're drinking beer and shit. Now, on the weekday, it's not that bad, but when there's weekends, they drink themselves under the fucking table.
Yeah.
But her name was Fiona O'Shea. That's how fucking Irish she
That,
was.
like I said, that is the most
That's
Irish
mega
name that has ever existed.
Yeah, and she was a ginger with a bunch of freckles.
Of course she was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually, and I was in Wales, not Ireland, but yeah, I was kind of blown away by, because I can drink quite a lot, but it's just like when I was over, I'm like, I kind of feel like an amateur. I kind of feel like an amateur, But
Yeah. I like
it's-
the Irish though, man. They got that psychopathic flavor to them. They're fucking just, they're fucking funny.
I know, I did,
They're
yeah.
fucking funny.
It's kind of fun.
You look at my cousin.
It's kind of
My
fun.
cousin, my dad's sister's boy. Fucking, and he looks like he's just a fucking leprechaun straight from fucking Ireland. Fucking ginger as fuck and all that. My
Aw.
dad's a ginger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Victor says British water has Loch Ness monster piss in it. Yeah, sure.
That's
And also,
Scotland though.
well, yeah, it is.
Loch Ness is in Scotland.
Yeah,
Okay.
which is a different thing.
Yeah.
Said my neighbor in college was from Boston, and he worked at a gas station, and a customer told him, "Go back to England, you British fuck," because they thought his accent was British.
Yeah.
And he was from Boston. That's adorable.
Yeah.
But my ex-husband was Welsh.
Yeah.
And he used to get very mad. Well, he wasn't mad, but he would just kind of like joke about it when people asked him about his accent. And every time somebody said that he was from England, he would accuse them of being Canadian.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
You know what I mean? Because he's like, well, that's about equivalent. You know what I mean? It's like Welsh people do not like to be compared to English people, and vice versa.
Yeah.
It's kind of a thing. So yeah. So he would actually be like, "Oh, you Canadian? What are you talking about? I'm Canadian." He's like, "Well, okay." Yeah, he would kind of get upset about it. But yeah. So all right. Where were we? All right. Okay. So Bass Reeves arrested his own church minister. Like we said, we got distracted by the whole illegal alcohol thing. So Bass Reeves was a lawman for all of this time, more than 30 years. Now, Oklahoma became a state in 1907, at which point Bass Reeves was 68 years old. Now, because, obviously the Indian Territory didn't exist anymore, and so there wasn't a need for somebody to go riding the ranges looking for all of these lawless, criminals that were running around in this area. So he basically got put on, a more regular police beat, like in the town. So he would basically, whereas before he was going after murderers and cattle rustlers and that kind of shit, now he's going after dudes gunfighting in saloons and bootleggers and that kind of stuff, like in town kind of shit. You know what I mean? So he was made an officer of the Muskogee Police Department. And he was there for about 2 years and started getting sick. But the thing about it, and we mentioned this earlier, because of Plessy versus Ferguson, which was a very famous court case in the United States as far as racial relations go. The actual Plessy was a guy that he was on a train, I believe it was a train in Louisiana, and he sat in a whites only car. Now I will note, as far as I can recall, that Plessy was not, he was like an eighth black.
Yeah.
But because of the stupid laws at the time, I don't even know how anybody would even know. But apparently he looked enough black that it's like, well, you can't sit in this train car, and he didn't want to move. So he took it to the Supreme Court, and he lost. The Supreme Court basically upheld, we can have separate facilities for white people and black people as long as they're quote-unquote equal. Spoiler alert, they were not. But that's how they justified it for all that time. So after that court decision, it wasn't an immediate, kind of consequences. But over the next few years, segregation started getting way, way worse. And so Bass Reeves, like I said, even though he'd served for 30 plus years, he would go in a restaurant in some town, which he had been able to do before, and he would get kicked out. Because it's this is whites only, which hadn't happened before. And he started to get kind of disillusioned because he's like, look, I spent 30 years of my fucking life riding around the range, picking up criminals for the government, and now they're fucking me over. Pretty much. It's everything that I read said that he kind of felt that way about it. He felt betrayed, as you would. That seems very understandable. He's like, I can't even eat in the same restaurant as the white criminals that I bring in. Yeah. You know what I mean?
This is why any kind of race law is fucking, you don't really want to get involved in that shit. All people are people. All right? All free people have the same fucking rights. All right? Rights can only be taken from somebody by due process. And what the language of the time, due process means a serious process. What they're talking about is a trial.
Yeah.
Your rights can only be taken from you if you've been found guilty of a crime. All right? And when you serve your time on the crime, they're restored because now you're free again.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't really believe... Yeah, you can keep track of how many convictions somebody has, but that shouldn't affect their rights.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah, the rights are the same. So if you're trying to hire for somebody from a job, then yeah, we said, well, this dude was convicted of fucking crimes against little children and shit. No, you can't work in a school. What the fuck are you talking about? No, you can't work at Disneyland. You crazy?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously.
That's fucking right.
Yeah.
But you can't take his right to vote away or right to freedom of speech or to fucking protect himself with arms or, he still has all the rights of self-defense and shit. All right? And when you start dealing with racial laws, it starts making people unequal. Doesn't matter. Any way it can go. So no, that's the slippery slope.
And that's exactly what happened.
That's what happened with this segregation thing. It became fucking crazy. I don't think the Supreme Court thought it was going to end up doing that, because eventually they did reverse it, but it took a long time.
Not until the 60s.
Not until the 60s.
That wasn't reversed until the 60s.
Yeah, a couple generations.
Yeah, which is crazy to think about.
You know, then you got other people that learn how to make money on it.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Everybody always makes money off
Yeah.
whatever comes up.
Right.
No
Becomes
matter how shitty it
institutionalized
is.
ways of making money. Now, I don't believe in segregation at all. I think everybody's the same. But during segregation, some black people got rich off of that. Because now you're opening up a new market where you can have schools, private schools, black people only. You can have a stock trading place called Black Wall Street, black people only. All right. So it did have a few advantages. Some black people were getting rich on that.
Yeah.
You know?
It didn't last long, though, because a lot of that usually got, like, crushed down pretty easily.
Yeah. Other people would try to
Quickly.
stop it.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, like I said, the whole, like, Black Wall Street thing, that got burned down by white supremacists, like, in 1920.
Yeah, they rioted. It was during a riot. A bunch of white.
Yeah.
I don't know. What was the excuse? I don't remember what the excuse was.
I don't remember what the excuse was, but... Yeah,
But they
we should
burned
do
it down.
we should do a whole show about
Right.
that. I mean, you know what the excuse was.
Through segregation, actually, or actually a lot of black people are actually starting to actually become very wealthy on it, but it's morally wrong.
Yeah.
That's the problem. It's morally
There's
wrong.
no justification
Yeah,
for it. There's
yeah.
just not.
Everyone's
There's no
supposed-
moral justification for
No,
it.
everyone is supposed to be under the same law.
Yeah.
Race should have nothing to do with it.
Yeah. I mean, I still don't think we've got to that point, but it's just kind of like it's...
No, the laws are the same for everybody.
Yeah, but I can see where... I don't know. There's still like a lot of lingering shit from this era, because this really wasn't that long ago. Like I said, Jim Crow laws weren't really abolished until the 60s. So...
Everyone has the same rights, though.
Yeah, in theory.
They do. You go into court of law, you do.
In theory.
In the court of law, you do.
Yeah.
There is nothing in these laws that, and in most of these state laws I can think of, says that there's a different law for white people and black people.
No, it's not on the books
same
anymore.
Yeah.
But
Right.
like I said, just
This
in
back in this day, it was.
Yeah.
It was definitely, there were certain laws.
So
people
I can
that-
understand like
Right.
why Bass Reeves was pissed off about
Right.
this, because like I said, he went through a lot of like racist shit while he was obviously trying to apprehend white dudes, but it wasn't even as bad as later on. Like I said, he couldn't even like walk into a place. Like he used to be able to just walk in anywhere and no one gave a shit really, because he was a marshal. But it's just like, and then but after this, you know, you walk into a place, you can't come in here.
Yeah.
You know, because you're not white. And he was just kind of like, man, I spent like 30 years like bringing in criminals for you motherfuckers, and this is what happens.
Right.
You know what I mean? Which, like I said, that'd be enough to kind of piss you off. So, like I said, he felt a little bit betrayed about it. But yeah, so during this time, his health started declining. You know, around 1907, 1908, right around the time that Oklahoma became a state. And so he eventually had to retire. I mean, he worked until, like I said, like only 2 years before he died. And he was, you know, getting kind of sick, like, before that even. But while he was alive, he was a legend. Like, there were, even while he was alive, there were, like, fucking folk songs about him and shit. You know what I mean? So everybody knew who he was. And, you know, his reputation preceded him. So he ended up dying in 1910 of Bright's disease, which is nephritis. It's a kidney, you know, it's a kidney ailment. So, yes, he ended up dying of that. As I said, that he had the first wife before she had died of cancer. He had a second wife at this stage who died, I think, the same year as he did. Her name was Winnie Sumter. She, like I said, she might have been, I want to say she was Chickasaw, but I'm not real sure. And like I said, they had 11-ish kids, him with his first wife. So he was kind of sadly, I don't know if he was entirely forgotten about, at least by historians, but I think like mainstream people like kind of forgot about him for a little while. But it does kind of seem like in the last 2 decades, it seems like he's gotten a lot more, like people are remembering him more. Like he had a bridge named after him, like over the Arkansas River. That was in 2011. They put up a statue of him in 2012 in Arkansas, rather, in Fort Smith, like where most of his work was done from. And he got inducted into the Texas Trail of Fame in 2013. And as I said, there have been a lot of kind of movies, comic books, stuff like that about him. Probably the most best known was Lawman, Bass Reeves, which is on Paramount Plus, which is a series. And there was a movie that came out in 2019 called Hell on the Border, which is about him also. And there was a movie that came out in 2021 called The Harder They Fall, which he's a character in. I don't think it's like completely about him, but you know what I mean. So, as I mentioned earlier, even though most stuff that you see about Bass Reeves says the real Lone Ranger, and even ours says that, but mine has a question mark on it, because most people, even though there are some similarities, he had a white or gray horse. Like he would leave silver dollars as
he'd pay for silver.
He'd pay for things in silver dollars. Like with the Lone Ranger, it was silver bullets, I think. And he was in disguise. He always had like an Indian scout with him, blah blah. But the thing about it was that a lot of other figures from this era could also fit that same mold. So I don't think he was necessarily the direct inspiration, because like I said, the Lone Ranger story originally originated on the radio, like radio serials, like back in the 30s. And from everything that they know, like the people that were developing the character, they wanted somebody that was like Tom Mix, who was a famous like kind of cowboy star, like actor. Somebody like that, but also like a little bit legendary, like Robin Hood or Zorro or something like that. So they were kind of going for that. And like I said,
it was marketing.
It wasn't unusual. Like, everybody said it's like, oh, well, he had like an Indian guide. A lot of marshals did. I mean, there was, because they were...
That's what you needed.
Patrolling Indian territory. Yeah. They didn't know their way around. They didn't know the languages. They didn't know the people. So they always had, a posse or like, at least one other person with them who knew their way around and knew the languages and stuff. So that wasn't strange. You know what I mean? So it wasn't just, he wasn't the only one that did that.
I think the guys who came up with the Lone Ranger concept didn't know who Bass Reeves was.
Maybe, I mean, it's possible they did. It's possible they had heard about him at some point.
It was just a generic dude that they could tell a story about, a generic Western hero.
Yeah.
Like Zorro, just a Robin Hood. That's
somebody who was... And somebody who was like a good dude who had like a code of honor and all that other kind of stuff, which, like I said, Bass Reeves did too. So
when you're going that route, you have no need to go into history and look for a person who was like that. It's just easier just to make up something out of whole cloth. We need a Zorro, a cowboy Zorro. Okay, and then they just assemble that concept.
Yeah, like a superhuman kind of character.
Then they start making stories based upon it. So, Bass Reeves was, he was a real man, all right?
And he was way fucking cooler than
the
Lone Ranger.
All right?
And he really did all that shit.
But, if you look at it this way, maybe the Lone Ranger, he wasn't based on Bass Reeves, so maybe he should have been, what I mean? But here's another thing. Everybody knows who Zorro is. Or, excuse me, everybody knows who Lone Ranger is, okay? If you can use the Lone Ranger to bring up awareness of the stories
about Bass
Reeves, you could say,
then that's a win.
Bass Reeves. You ever heard of him? Oh man,
let me tell you.
That was the Black Lone Ranger. You're like, what the fuck are you talking about? This isn't Blazing Saddles. Oh no, that shit was real. They actually had a dude like that. And then you go,
but better.
Yeah, okay, that is basically the same story as the Lone Ranger.
Yeah, because we were watching a documentary about it, and I guess like some of his descendants, some of them were kind of upset about it. They're like, the Lone Ranger thing, that's kind of bullshit or whatever. But a couple of them did kind of say, no, we kind of like that because, the Lone Ranger, everybody knows who that is, and it's just like if we can use that as an in, and more people know about Bass Reeves because of that, then that's a good thing because he was a real dude and he was like way cooler than some fictional character.
Yeah, mythology is a very powerful tool.
It is.
And there's a lot of truth behind mythology.
Yeah, so I think like some of them did realize that and they were just like, if that makes more people aware of him, then that's good.
Yeah, so they come out with this new series who's got a good director who's made a lot of other good shit. We haven't seen it yet. I would like to see it. We're going to see it soon, I think.
It's on Paramount Plus. Like
maybe we can buy it. Can you buy it a la carte?
Oh, I'm not sure. I mean, you could probably like subscribe to. Well, you could subscribe to Paramount Plus like for a free trial and then
just
cancel
binge
it.
Watch it.
They cancel it.
Now, if I want to see this, if I want to see that series, I'm gonna pay for it.
Yeah.
So they get something.
So they get something out of it.
Maybe you can get it on Blu-ray.
I've heard it's good.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna see it.
I mean, I don't know. I'll look
maybe they have the first episode for free.
Yeah, we'll see.
And if it's good, then
because I kind of wanted to watch it, and then I was like, oh man, it's on Paramount.
It's probably
Plus.
good.
I don't know.
It's probably pretty good.
Honestly,
I like westerns.
We might be
in the
able
comment
to.
section saying not really much into westerns because you haven't seen good westerns. See Unforgiven.
I mean, there's a lot of shitty westerns. To be fair, well, there's a lot of shitty every genre.
Yeah,
but. I'm not a huge fan of westerns either, but there's a lot of ones I like though.
Clint Eastwood's High Plains Drifter.
That's probably my favorite.
Yeah,
western.
and it's paranormal.
That's probably my favorite western.
Because he is a drifter from a higher plane. He's a fucking revenant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I like that it's supernatural, but it doesn't like whack you over the head with it being supernatural.
Yeah, most people don't understand.
Like it's kind of subtle.
I didn't realize that's what it was until I was grown.
Yeah.
I saw that all the time as a kid. And I knew that something was spooky happening where they were showing the old sheriff getting whipped to death in the middle of town. And this new guy, it faded into this new guy, and he's reenacting how the sheriff was killed at the end of the town, and he's punishing the town for the basically the sin of being a bunch of cowards.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he makes the town into hell, paints it all red and shit. And I was like, I knew something was weird, but I was too young to fully grasp it.
Well, you probably didn't know what a revenant was.
I didn't know what a revenant was.
Because it's not exactly a ghost, but it's not exactly a zombie either.
No. It's a supernatural force.
It's kind of a combination
returned from the afterlife to avenge the death of somebody. Like the Crow.
Yeah,
basically
the Crow
like
was
the
also
Crow.
a revenant. It's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing. But yeah, so, I mean, I had a really good time, like, researching this dude. And like I said, I kind of feel like more people... I like that more people are, like, finding out about him now. Because when I looked up, there's a lot of documentaries, there was a lot of other stuff about him. And I was just like, I guess he's finally, like, getting his due. Because this dude...
He was the real deal, and you had to return him to his place in history. I don't think he was... Okay, dudes that were fanboys of the Old West knew about him.
Mm.
But he wasn't brought into the mainstream because during the Hollywood, during the time of when westerns were big, all right, wanted to make as much money as they could at the box office. So that meant you wanted to cater to the white audience.
Yeah.
And having a black sheriff, maybe some people would have liked it, but other people fucking wouldn't come to see the movie.
Yeah, probably a lot of people wouldn't have, sadly, back in those days.
Although, had you put that back up in maybe the 70s?
Now, 70s, that might have been a different ballgame.
And it might have been a cult classic.
Yeah.
And I imagine a lot of black dudes would have watched it.
Yeah.
If it was cool. And then, a lot of people don't realize that Night of the Living Dead was a black classic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because they would play that over and over again.
Well,
at the black theaters, because it didn't have it didn't have copyright.
Yeah.
So a theater could play it. They'd always play it at midnight. And they let the kids in, underage, come see it. They grew up watching that, and it's got a black lead.
Yeah.
And he does all
which
kinds
you
of
didn't
cool
see.
Shit. You didn't see it in a horror movie.
And especially in a horror movie in 1968. That was like fucking mind-blowing. If there was a great documentary that's on Shudder called Horror Noir, and there's a bunch of people on there talking about how that was like their first experience seeing, they were kids, and it's just kind of like they really liked horror, but there wasn't anything
with black people
in it. So it's just like when they saw that, they like blew their fucking minds.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That it's just like that was the first time they'd ever seen
and the
that.
black dude's the hero.
Yeah.
He's in charge of shit.
Even though bad shit happens at the end.
Yeah,
but
bad shit happened to him, but yeah.
But he was like bossing people around and stuff. They were like, "What the fuck?" They had never seen that in a movie
He had
before.
situational awareness. The other ones didn't.
Yeah.
You know?
And like I said, it's crazy because, at least according to George Romero, that was a total accident. He's like,
Yeah.
I just knew the dude and he was a really good actor, so I put him in the movie. I didn't really think about
He was a drama
it.
teacher, I think, wasn't he, at the time?
Or something like that. And it's just like,
Yeah,
I don't,
he
you
was
know,
the best-
I don't know. But
he was the best actor that he had.
yeah,
He just used
he's
that
just
one.
like, he's just the best actor I know.
Right.
I didn't really think about it.
They used that one. He didn't really think about the race too much. It was the
He's-
same thing with Ellen Ripley out of fucking...
He's like, I didn't really
Alien.
think about I was making a statement.
Yeah.
But
Same thing with Ellen Ripley out of the Alien series. Originally, all the characters were basically male.
or we're gender
Generic,
neutral.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
they just said
Yeah.
it didn't matter, like one or the other.
And somebody was reading the script, and he goes, "This is a great script. Is Ripley a girl?" And fucking Ridley Scott said, "Yeah,
Sure,
yeah,
why not?
She could be a female." And that's how they cast it.
Either,
And boom,
whatever.
Yeah, right.
Like I said, it seemed like they just wrote the characters without worrying whether they were men or
Yeah,
women.
yeah.
They just wrote them as characters. I think that's why that probably worked out.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But no, man, he's a Wild West classic, and he's in style right now because he'd been neglected for a long time. The Black Lone Ranger. Not based on the Lone Ranger wasn't based on him, but it should have been.
Probably. It would have been a lot cooler.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I said, I haven't seen The Lone Ranger in a long
Yeah.
time. I remember seeing some of them in syndication when I was little,
Yeah.
but, you know. It's
Yeah.
kind of a cool story. I'd kind of forgotten the whole backstory about why he wore the mask. Because he was supposed to be dead.
Who? The Lone
The
Ranger?
Lone Ranger.
Oh, okay.
Like,
Yeah.
in the context of the story,
okay.
I had totally forgotten about that aspect.
Yeah.
Because he was one of the, was he a marshal or whatever he was? But, like, a bunch of them were killed, like, at this big massacre, and he was the only one that was still alive.
He
And
might
so
be
he
enough.
was supposed to be dead, so
Right,
he didn't want anybody to know who he was. Like, so he was hiding his identity.
I gotcha.
And I was like, oh my god, I totally forgot about
I
that.
gotcha.
That's actually pretty cool, but yeah.
All right, so let's go ahead and shut it down. It's a good show.
Yeah, it's almost 11 o'clock.
Yeah, see if
We're
we got
gonna
any food downstairs.
wrap it up. Yeah, I'm starving.
Okay.
We probably still got some chicken because we bought a bunch of
I got some
we
chicken.
bought a bunch of chicken and
Got chicken.
sides and stuff
Should've
like that
got
from
damn fried
Publix
chicken.
early.
That cold fried chicken.
I told you to get it.
Yeah, I know. I should have got it.
Well, it's
We
too
can get
late.
some more
It's too
later.
late now. It's closed.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay. So we're gonna wrap it up this evening. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed the show as much as I enjoyed researching it because this was a lot of fun to do actually. And we were watching like documentaries about it last night. We were like laying around. It's like, ooh, there's another one. And we like watched hours and hours about this dude. But yeah, it was like super fun. But yeah, there's a couple books about him on Kindle Unlimited if you want to read those because they're actually really good. One of them is just a novella. It's like 50, 60 pages. And it only took me like a couple hours to read, but it's really good. But yeah, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this, like I said. And we will be back on Friday night for the Sidetrack show. So hopefully you guys can join us for that. We'll have a drink and talk about whatever the hell we feel like talking about, which is always fun. So thanks, everybody. We will see you guys again on Friday night. Good night.